Labour Party. That poll dropped just about an hour and a quarter ago. Let us know what you think. Use your ways, gbviews at gbnews.com. Should they just get rid of Rishi Sunak and try for a new leader, or is it just too late and the party needs to stand united? Let me know what your thoughts are. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The government has started to identify which illegal migrants will be on the first flight to Rwanda. Downing Street says the initial cohort of people are now being contacted, with the Prime Minister still determined to see the first plane departing later this spring. MPs are due to vote this evening on 10 changes to the Rwanda bill made by peers in the House of Lords. Rishi Sunak says he is still committed to getting flights off the ground.
It's important that we get the Rwanda scheme up and running because we need to have a deterrent. We need to make it clear that if you come here illegally, you won't be able to stay and we will be able to remove you. That is the only way to properly solve the issue of illegal migration. Now, we've made good progress. Boat numbers were down by a third last year, so that shows that our plan is working. But in order to finish the job, we need the Rwanda scheme through. We're getting it through Parliament. Everyone is trying to block us, including the Labour Party, because they don't have a plan to tackle this problem. We do. I'm determined to see it through, get the deterrent up and running as quickly as possible.
The Prime Minister also rebuffed speculation about a leadership challenge, saying he's not interested in Westminster politics. Speaking at a business event in Warwickshire, Rishi Sunak urged his party to stick to the plan and told backbenchers that the economy is turning a corner. He was forced to speak out after rumours suggested right-wing Tories were lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. In Coventry, the Prime Minister announced plans to create 20,000 new apprenticeships. Rishi Sunak pledged £60 million of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funding training for young people and cutting red tape for small businesses. Labour's accused the government of economic failure, but Mr Sunak says action is being taken and the full cost of apprenticeships will be paid for people aged under 21 at small firms from the 1st of April. Small business owners have welcomed the move.
I think the apprenticeship payment in full would be fantastic. We've had an apprentice before. She did phenomenally well, but funds have been quite tight the last couple of years, and that's not something that I've been able to enter into again, although I want to. So that is a benefit.
I think there's lots of positives in there. I think there's some great stuff for helping small businesses. For our business, we need a bit more.
To the small businesses in the UK, we'll see it as to what it is. It's probably a last-ditch effort to get some confidence back. I don't think he's done enough. I don't think it's going to give the confidence to small businesses.
In other news, the Foreign Secretary has criticised the Russian election result, saying it wasn't free and fair. Early results showed President Vladimir Putin won nearly 88% of the vote, giving him a 5th term in office. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says he's behaving like a modern-day Stalin, and he accused Putin of stealing the election after having opponents imprisoned or murdered. Thousands of people turned up at polling stations in Russia and in cities across the world to protest the result. The Kremlin responded by promising to imprison anyone taking part for up to 5 years. Former Kremlin advisor and Russian exile Valery Morozov says that there is no viable opposition to Putin. And Britain's most successful female Olympian, Dame Laura Kenny, has announced her retirement from professional cycling. The athlete posted the news on Instagram, saying it was time to move on. The 5-time gold medalist had been expected to compete at the Paris Games this summer. The 31-year-old welcomed her 2nd son last year and said spending time at home with her family was proving more important to her. And we could see flying taxis take to the skies in 2 years under the government's new drones plan. The Department for Transport is proposing flying taxis without pilots on board by 2030 as part of its Future of Flight Action Plan. It says the venture would mean the adoption of technology that was once confined to the realms of science and fiction. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Right, busy week ahead, busy day ahead. Let's get cracking. And our top story this hour, GB News understands that the first set of illegal migrants to be put on a deportation flight to Rwanda are already being identified by the government. And it comes as Rishi Sunak's flagship scheme is being discussed in the Commons today, and that debate started around about half an hour ago. And of course, the big vote is around about 8 p.m. tonight. We'll have that all throughout the show. Well, joining me now to discuss this is GB News political correspondent Olivia Eardley. I'm also joined in the studio by Conservative MP for Bassett Law, Brendan Clark-Smith. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with you, Liv. Feels like Groundhog Day, more ping-pong than a youth club. It's been going round and round and round. Can we expect a resolution at last?
Well, it does sound like we probably will get a resolution tonight. There are 10 Lords amendments which are going to be debated in the Commons today. Those Lords amendments are essentially aimed at sort of watering down the bill. We pretty much know the Conservatives have a big majority in the House of Commons. James Cleverly wants to get all of those amendments voted down. It looks very, very likely that he will succeed in that. There are a couple of Conservative MPs who've gone on the record and said that they are mulling over the prospect of rebelling. One of them is Robert Buckland, former Justice Secretary, who quite likes the look of one of the amendments, which would stipulate that Rwanda has to implement a treaty to bolster its own immigration system before migrants could be sent there. But on the whole, it looks very, very likely that this bill is going to get through tonight. That said, it's not the end of the road. It's not the end of the problems for Rishi Sunak at all. The Kigali administration is actually saying that it would like to only have 100 or so migrants come in the first few months of this scheme because they want a while for the scheme to sort of bed in. So Rishi Sunak's plan to get those flights off the ground before the May elections and get a little boost before those local elections looks like it's probably not going to go that well. Even if some migrants take off, probably won't be enough to get that boost he's hoping for.
Pragmatically, realistically, what's the mood within the Conservative Party? I'll ask this fella in a minute. But what's the mood within the party that you talk to about the actual chances of getting a single solitary human to Rwanda? We know that Christopher Hope bet Rishi Sunak a single pint of beer that it wouldn't happen. I reckon that pint's safe. What's the mood on the ground before we get to Brendan?
I mean, almost no one, apart from those in Rishi's real inner circle, think that it's likely that any flights will get off the ground before the election. Some people think that there might be sort of one or two people who go to Rwanda, but there is a appeals system sort of baked into the legislation as it stands. So there would be a sort of 6-week delay even after those first flights take off. And then you have the issue of Rwanda itself, and then you have the issue of lawyers trying to poke holes in the legislation. So it does look very, very unlikely. I mean, I don't know about you, Brendan, but I think the mood in the Conservative Party has almost never been bleaker. They're 20 points behind in the polls.
23, according to the latest one.
23 points behind in the polls. And there's talk about, installing someone like Penny Mordaunt before the next election as a kind of final roll of the dice. But it's not looking good, and pretty much everyone knows that now.
OK, Brendan Clark-Smith, I'm afraid at this point, Captain, I have to turn to you on that bleak moment. The Rwanda bill, of course, you resigned over that as the Deputy Chair. Do you think, looking back, it would have been worth it?
Oh, I think it was worth it to make the point. I think I've been fairly consistent with this idea about notwithstanding clauses, and we've had that elsewhere as well with legislation. And the biggest worry that we've really got, Martin, is that the lawyers will jump in even if we pass it tonight. So that was my concern. Now, if we get a plane off, great. Now, we're not looking at sending thousands and thousands of people to Rwanda. It's going to be a small number, ideally. It will create quite a hoo-ha, I think, if we do get a plane on the runway, and ideally off the runway as well with people in it. So I do think there is a chance there. I do hope the legislation works. I did vote for it at third reading. Yeah. I did think it was an insurance policy with that amendment that we did want to put through there. But I do think that'll also give us a boost in the polls eventually. But it's not the only thing we're going to do. It's not going to solve illegal migration purely on its own, but it's just one of the methods that we're using to bring it down.
I've been saying all along, I think there's more chance of me getting to the moon than there is an asylum seeker getting to Rwanda, and I'm not being negative. I just look through the prism of history. As you just alluded to, the Lords, the lawyers, the lovies, the charities, the NGOs, the media establishment, the entire system, the archbishops, the Church of England, just seem existentially opposed to this. Why do you think that is? Why are they so opposed to something which, it might not be the most direct route of solving it, but taking back control of our borders has been voted for since 2010, time and time again. The electorate wants something to happen. Why don't the rest of the people?
Yeah, this is all about open borders, isn't it? It depends whether you wanted to take back control or not. Now, I've long made the argument that it's very, very difficult for us to operate within what I call the Blair era legal framework that we had. That includes the Human Rights Act that we brought in 1998. Of course, when it's been thrown out by the courts, it's our own courts that have actually been doing it. It's not even got as far as the ECHR because we've been implementing that. So perhaps when we come along and we look at our manifesto, what we're actually going to go to the country with, we may be having a wider discussion about that HRA legislation or whether we stay in the ECHR or not.
All right.
The local elections are coming up in May, and that's, becoming a bit terrifying, I think, for quite a lot of Conservative MPs that I've spoken to. It looks like the Conservatives are going to do very, very badly. If they do you think maybe that would be the moment to roll the dice and try a new leader?
I think we get to the point where we look daft, I think, if there's constant navel-gazing and people are sick of us fighting, they don't see that unity, and divided parties don't win elections. And we are a broad church. We have got to do things together. People remember I was there to the very end with Boris Johnson. That didn't work out very well for us. We had Liz Truss for a short time, and then since then the polls have just gone down and down and down. So I think if we were to change again, I think that there's serious questions that the public are going to be asking, how professional we look. Now, with those local elections, bear in mind the last time that those places were up for election, we did quite well. So that would suggest in terms of losses, it's kind of baked in almost that it's going to be quite a difficult time. There'll be a lot of councillors going out there. We've got a couple of mayoral elections as well. So I would expect that to be difficult. I think we do need a bounce before then. That may mitigate it a bit. But I think if you're talking about rolling the dice now, I think that could also have some consequences too.
A lot of people say continually, no doubt to you in your constituency, they certainly do when we switch on the emails here, and that is the Conservative voters just want a leader who's a true Conservative. And you've been voting along the lines of your Suella Bravermans, your Kemi Badenochs. These are the sort of people that yourself and your former colleague Lee Anderson were backing. In your heart, do you not think it's time to actually be properly Conservative again? Loyalty is one thing, but you can be loyal as a ship sinks, and where would it get you apart from the bottom of the sea?
Yeah, I mean, we want to see migration controlled. We want low taxes. I believe in things like personal freedoms. I don't like telling people what to do or banning things all the time. And these are the principles that we've joined the Conservative Party for. I joined because of Margaret Thatcher. That was very much my outlook on life. Now, is Rishi Sunak a real Conservative? Yes, he is. I think absolutely he is. But if you look at what he's had to deal with, we've had COVID where we spent $400 billion. That is really, really restricting what he can do in terms of tax cuts and keeping inflation down. So I do think you have to give people a bit of a chance there, but we've also got to be realistic with those constraints that we're working within. But certainly, as a very blue-blooded Conservative, I've been a member for 25 years now, my whole adult life. People can guess how old I am at home, probably with that. But yeah, I think that's the thing, really. Conservatives pull together, and I think the public have seen us not pulling together, and that's why our polling's as bad as it is.
I've got to ask you about Lee Anderson. The day the pair of you resigned over this Rwanda bill, you both came and sat in this studio together, and you and him, you're thick as thieves. I mean, you were deputy chairs together, you're good buddies. I know even after he crossed the floor, you had a pint with him. Your name is talked about a lot on this Reform 9, those who might cross over. You did, however, put a very amusing message on for social media about that. Tell the viewers in case they missed it.
OK, yeah. Obviously, really disappointing to see Lee go. Is a good friend of mine, still remains a good friend of mine. And I think if we could have kept him on board, that would have been great. He had the whip taken away and has made his decision, and that's a great shame. People are clearly going to link me with Reform, seeing as we're such good mates, or policy-wise, or whatever. Get along very well with Nigel, get along well with Richard, but I've never actually met Richard in person. I know there's a lot of speculation about, people have had dinners with everybody and all this.
Yeah, went to a Holiday Inn.
Yeah, exactly. Complete nonsense. I think we've appeared on television a couple of times together, and that's it. So, phone ringing off the hook as it does with these things, and they want to know and whatever. So I thought, actually, I'd be a bit mischievous. So put a statement out, put a link on there to follow, and, what was it? Rick rolling, as you call it, a link to a Rick Astley video. So apparently our journo's messaging me saying, like, yeah, you got me with that one.
And it was a link to Never Gonna Give You Up. So that was your God message.
Yeah.
Never Gonna Give You Up. You're going to stick with the Conservatives.
Yeah, somebody said 2007 called they want their joke back. But yeah, I'm there for life. I think with me, you know, if it ever got to the stage I was that frustrated, you know, I would do something else and take a break with it. I think they'd probably have to bury me with my membership card, I think.
So what's going to happen tonight? 8 o'clock. Again, it feels like Groundhog Day. You're expecting to get the Rwanda bill over the line tonight?
I would think so, yeah. I think there'd be a fair amount of pushback with those in the Lords who are voting against it, primarily Labour Lords and the members of the clergy and so on who are in there. I don't think people at home are too impressed that this legislation is being frustrated. I think it will go through eventually, and then it will be the case of, can we get the planes off? Are the lawyers going to jump in? And if they do jump in, what's that going to do with our manifesto and relationship with the ECHR? Personally, I'd like to go.
OK, there we have it. Well, it does feel like Groundhog Day. Thank you for coming in and joining us again. Brendan Clark-Smith and, of course, Olivia Utley. Thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. And we'll have lots more on that story, of course, throughout the show as that debate rolls on ahead to that big debate, that big vote at 8 p.m. tonight. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Now, spring is in the air when it stops raining, at least, and so is your chance to win a garden gadget package, a shopping spree and an incredible 12,345 quid. 1, 2, 3, 4, £5 tax-free in Moolah. And here's how you could get all of those prizes in your house.
We've got cash, treats and a spring shopping spree to be won in a great British giveaway. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Get stuck in now. Coming up, as a migration surge drives London population to a new record high, I'm asking, is Britain's capital overcrowded? Who'd want to live in London anyway? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about... anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... They're not... Neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting a zip.
Yeah, and also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting a top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly... Yeah, I mean, this is stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far-right.
But also, even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day. What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
well,
if you
no,
say
they
that,
won't,
will they?
won't.
Because you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, and the unfashionable workplace.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 3:23 is your time. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, London's population has surged to a new record high after a sharp rise in migration and a reversal of the COVID-era race for space. New research from the think tank Centre for Cities found that the capital had almost certainly surpassed its pre-pandemic peak of 10.1 million people. A large increase in international migration explained the majority of the increase over the last 2 years, the report found. I'm delighted to say I'm now joined in the studio by the Executive Director of Migration Watch, Dr. Mike Jones. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have you. So on the one hand, people say, who'd want to live in London? The answer is a lot of people, and 10.1 million now. And this has been driven in large part by a surge in people from overseas coming to the capital, placing huge strain on public services.
That's correct. I mean, the Centre for Cities, they looked at numbers between mid-2019 and mid-2021, and they found a population increase in London of around 75 million. However, that was pretty much reversed the year after. We had a population increase of 66 million. 66,000.
Even that would be too much for London. So it was 75,000 left during the COVID period. 66,000 came in, but that's just grown and grown and grown.
It has, precisely. And they identified 2 factors that contributed to this population increase. Changes in work habits and people moving out of the capital on the one hand, and also international migration. Although the report tended to kick that into the long grass, it focused very much on working habits and relocation.
And what that's had is an impact at grassroots level. I believe you have some information about some of the waiting lists now that people are facing in certain areas of London.
Yes, I mean, the Evening Standard did an investigative research into, a trust in northwest London, and they found that, waiting times for operations were around 18 months. So obviously, immigration does have an impact on the quality of life. London is more dishevelled, more congested. We're living in smaller homes, renting in smaller flats, but it also poses a risk to people's lives, simply because of the pressure on waiting lists.
And people might say, it's London, why should I care about London? But this is being replicated across the country because, of course, people flock to urban areas because that's where the work is. That places huge pressure on housing, on schools, on dentists, on GPs. We all know that. And this is something which isn't going to end anytime soon.
No, it's not. You've got to remember, in 2020, net migration was around 90,000. 2022, according to revised ONS figures, that was around 745,000. So there's been a huge increase there. And we now have a points-based system that is geared towards mass unrestricted migration. And of course, the Conservatives haven't changed the legal system, which would allow us to deport illegal migrants crossing the Channel. And
some astonishing figures here as well. London makes up 26% of the UK's GDP. 18.5% of all jobs by the end of the decade will be in London. So we're seeing, on the one hand, a huge influx of those from overseas and an internal brain drain because the regions just aren't being supported. And Mike, the net result of that is a massive pressure on housing. Many people now just simply giving up. They'll never be able to afford to buy a house in London or perhaps any major city.
Yeah, I mean, it damages people's disposable incomes because people are renting mouldy shoe boxes and spending half their disposable income for the pleasure. And obviously starting families is very difficult. People have to move outside of London, and it damages productivity because many of the best graduates we have can't actually afford to move to the capital city or to many of the other big cities in the UK. So it's damaging disposable incomes and it's damaging productivity.
Can I ask you, as you're here, Mike, about the Rwanda vote this evening? It's been going around so long now. I think most people are losing their will to live, but they say they're confident. Do you think that this has any chance of getting a single person to Rwanda before the next general election?
I think it's unlikely. If there are people sent to Kigali, they'll be very, very small in number. I mean, the problem is the legislation itself is not bulletproofed from the Human Rights Act. They disapplied various sections, but they didn't disapply Section 4. And if you don't disapply Section 4 and a complaint is made to the higher courts, they can issue what's called a declaration of incompatibility. And, you know, the Rwanda plan is dead in the water if that happens.
And a Section 4, for those who don't know, that gave ostensibly supremacy of British law above any foreign jurisdiction. So therefore we could say, yeah, it would be guided by those guidelines until a point. But they didn't push through with that. That's what one of the revolts was about, that our man Brendan Clark-Smith and Lee Anderson resigned over. That got watered down. So the plan that's going up for vote today, it still has the cat flap open to legal challengers, the lords, the lawyers, the charities, the archbishops. They'll do their very best to derail it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another problem with the bill itself. It hasn't disapplied Section 4, but it has something called Clause 4. So this allows asylum seekers to contest their deportation. Now, an asylum seeker can't say, listen, Rwanda's unsafe, I don't want to go there. But if they say, Rwanda is safe for me personally because of my individual circumstances, i.e. irreparable harm, they can contest that. And the lawyers have to take that very seriously. And there will be an evidence-gathering process as a result.
And we've seen, for example, people converting to Christianity, suddenly coming out as LGBTQ+. And there's a feeling that the system is being gamed, so people can remain, have the right to leave in the UK, and meanwhile they're sort of laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah, I mean, as Suella Braverman said, the system is rigged against majority opinion. It's been de-democratised. But all of this, you know, the NGOs, the activist lawyers, the blob, if you like, all of this is downstream of the legal system, of the Human Rights Act. And for whatever reasons, the Conservatives have chosen not to amend or abolish it. And this is where all the problems stem from. Instead, Priti Patel went ahead with the Rwanda plan, you know, this third safe country we could deport people to, but they hoped on a wing and a prayer that the courts and the lawyers wouldn't get involved. But oh boy, were they wrong.
Yeah, and let's see. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio. And that's the Executive Director of Migration Watch UK, Dr. Mike Jones. Thank you. Always a pleasure. And of course, we'll have that huge debate throughout the show ahead of that massive vote at 8 p.m. Rwanda or bust? Do you think it's going to happen? Well, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, and that's the point I'm talking about. Coming up, as the Rwanda bill is debated in the Commons this afternoon, Labour's Yvette Cooper has spoken exclusively to GBNews about how she'll deal with illegal migrants, and we'll hear what she has to say shortly on this show. She spoke to Chris Hope earlier. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. The government has started to identify which illegal migrants will be the first on a flight to Rwanda. Downing Street says the initial cohort of people are now being contacted, with the Prime Minister still determined to see the first plane departing later this spring. MPs are due to vote this evening on 10 changes to the Rwanda bill made by peers in the House of Lords. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has rebuffed speculation about a leadership challenge, saying he's not interested in Westminster politics. Speaking at a business event in Warwickshire, Rishi Sunak urged his party to stick to the plan and told backbenchers that the economy is turning a corner. He was forced to speak out after rumours suggested right-wing Tories were lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. And at an event in Coventry, the Prime Minister announced plans to create 20,000 new apprenticeships. Rishi Sunak pledged £60 million of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funding training for young people and cutting red tape for small businesses. He says the government will pay the full cost of apprenticeships for people aged 21 or under at small firms from the 1st of April. And in the United States, the former President Barack Obama has not long arrived in Downing Street for an undisclosed private meeting. Mr. Obama, who served in the White House from 2009 to 2017, smiled and waved before entering number 10 around half an hour ago. A White House source saying that he's there for an informal meeting with Rishi Sunak whilst he's in town. For the very latest top stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
So here's a quick snapshot then of today's markets. And the pound will buy you $1.2728 and €1.1690. The price of gold is £1,696.97 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,716 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And thank you very much, Polly. Coming up, we'll be hearing from the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, on how Labour will deal with illegal immigrants coming to the UK. She's been speaking to our political editor, Chris Hope. Look forward to that one. They've got a new plan, apparently, of thousands of extra workers to deal with this issue. We'll hear more after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm sure you have seen this video that went viral this week, and if you haven't, well, I think you're going to enjoy it. This is a firefighter leaning on a fence whilst watching a trapped driving instructor's car sink in 4 feet of floodwater. Looks very comfortable there, doesn't he? Just leaning against the fence.
Just chilling, just relaxing. Yeah, there were there were in fact two Essex fire and rescue crews, an ambulance and a police car parked near the sinking vehicle, but they wouldn't enter the water because they had to wait for specialist crews who were trained for the water depth.
Well, two people who weren't going to sit back and watch were these two, Jack and Danielle Price, who took it upon themselves to rescue the submerged driver. And Danielle joins us now. Very good morning to you, Danielle. And you are a hero, an absolute hero. What happened in this video? Make sense of it for us.
So we were filming in the area for our YouTube channel, and we've seen the fire brigade come through. I was actually out at 5 o'clock in the morning with my husband, Jamie. We know it always happens there, as you can see, and it was clear. We've seen the fire brigade come through, we've followed them, and they're just standing around as if nothing's happened. In the clip, it says he's fine, he's on his phone, and then sort of walked away. But what they failed to realise is when my partner actually opened the door, as you can hear, he's on the phone to the emergency crew in panic, thinking he's going to sink. So we could not just sit there and watch. He's absolutely terrified.
Yeah, poor bloke. Well done you. Do you reckon this is health and safety gone mad?
It is, because although I do sympathise with them, they are so red-taped, but surely sort of common sense has to kick in as open the door.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:37. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now you can see some pictures here of Barack Obama arriving at Downing Street for an undisclosed private meeting. Apparently, you remember the last time this gentleman was here, he was the president, April 2016, and he gave a stern warning. You may well recall that Britain would be at the back of the queue if we decided to vote Brexit. Well, we did vote for Brexit. And here's Mr. Obama again, entering the door of Downing Street. What would his message be this time? There's a huge election, of course, coming up in November for a future president. He's tagged on tightly to Joe Biden. What could be going on there? Exciting stuff. We'll have more as we find out throughout the show. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak sets out plans to support female entrepreneurs, cut red tape for businesses and boost apprenticeships. Well, speaking at an event early today in the Midlands, Rishi Sunak has pledged to create up to 20,000 more apprenticeships, promising to pay the full cost for people aged 21 or under from the start of April. Well, joining us now is GB News' economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Liam, welcome to the show. Always an absolute pleasure. Happy Monday to you. So Rishi Sunak is out and about, sending out some very, very positive messages. What's your take?
Happy Monday to you too, Martin. Look, when politicians start talking about how much they respect and want to help small businesses, you know there's an election coming up quite soon, because small business owners, people that work at small businesses, they tend to be swing voters. They tend to be non-ideological, very pragmatic, practical, hard-working people who will vote for anyone who they believe is going to make the economy better and going to make their small business work better. We have a tremendous number of small businesses in this country. Let's have a look with some on-the-money statistics, because it wouldn't be on the money without some statistics. We've got a graphic here, and GB News listeners can bear with me as I go through it. There you go, graphic, you can still see me. What more do you want in the world, Martin? 5.5 million small and medium-sized enterprises in the UK, about roughly up to sort of 50 or 100 employees. The Prime Minister announced today at this Business Connect meeting in the Midlands that he wants to allocate £60 million for 20,000 more apprenticeships. I have to say, that's not a lot of cash. That's 3,000 quid a pop. 3,000 quid. That's going to pay an apprentice for maybe, 2 or 3 months. An apprenticeship should last at least 2 years. He wants to slash regulation for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. And that is something that Downing Street is at pains to point out is a Brexit Brucey bonus. We couldn't have done that, say, officials, unless we were free of the European Union single market rules. And also, as you mentioned in your introduction there, a new task force for women setting up small and medium-sized enterprises. I don't think that's, necessarily a kind of touchy-feely piece of identity politics, because the evidence shows that women are really, really good at starting small businesses when they actually start them, but sometimes they may need a little bit of a leg up, a little bit of extra confidence and help to do so. Look, we're really good at small businesses in this country, Martin. Our small businesses are the backbone of the economy. They account for half of our GDP. That's all goods and services produced in each year. And they employ 2/3 of us. And yet what we're not very good at here in the UK is our small businesses becoming big businesses, becoming world-beating businesses, because we're not very good at getting finance behind them. The banks have almost abandoned financing small businesses. A lot of investors think small businesses aren't worth the candle. There are some angel investors that back small businesses, but we've got to do better at getting real money into the best small businesses. I heard a lot of good things from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in this speech, and I do believe that his affection for and desire to prioritise small businesses is genuine. He comes from a small business background himself, as do I, as we've often discussed. But I want to see a lot more about the real issue about small businesses. Late payment, the fact that big suppliers, big businesses often squeeze small businesses that they subcontract with in order that small businesses don't become bigger rivals. And that overall overwhelming problem, small businesses being able to get hold of finance to grow. Because when small businesses grow, often productivity grows, wealth grows, the economy grows, creates a tax revenue that makes everything else possible. So much innovation goes on in our small businesses. Particular emphasis should be, or particular recognition should be given, how many people of immigrant stock, my family included, Paddy's from the west of Ireland, I can say that, we just had St Patrick's Day weekend, coming over to the UK and building businesses, employing people and adding to the wealth and gaiety of the nation. And many other immigrant communities, the Asian business community, Chinese community, right across the board. And of course, many people have been in the UK for generations. We are a nation of shopkeepers, as has sometimes been said in a way of making fun of us. But we're good at small businesses. It's right the Prime Minister is emphasising them. But I don't think, for all the things he announced today, I don't think the emphasis on apprenticeships, there was no real money to back that up. And he needs to really grab the big issues that affect small businesses, namely late payment and sources of finance.
And Liam, you talked about a Brucey bonus. You talked about a Brexit bonus. What about something bigger, something more bold? What about cutting the corporation tax in a nimble way? We saw that in Ireland, in Cyprus. That's the kind of thing we're promised. And yet we still have a prohibitively high corporation tax, Liam, that's choking off these businesses at source.
Well, if I can go from reporting what Rishi Sunak says to giving my view, if I may, and this is a personal view, I've written a lot in my Sunday Telegraph column over recent months, the tax cuts that I think the Prime Minister should be emphasising, and they are indeed focused, firstly, on business. I think 25% corporation tax is too high. I think there's a Laffer curve in corporation tax. What does that mean? It means that when you lower the rate of corporation tax, you increase the amount of revenue you get from that tax because you have more businesses doing more. You don't squeeze businesses out of existence, or you don't hinder those that already exist to do less. And then the other big tax cut I think should happen, and this is, for me, the most equitable tax cut you could possibly do, the one that will benefit the greatest number of people, is you need to raise that personal threshold from 12.5 grand to 20 odd grand, because if you're paying, when you earn more than 12.5 grand, you start paying tax. And with all respect, £1,000 a month is not a huge wage. In my view, if you're earning £1,000 a month, you're probably on benefits anyway. The state should not be taking lumps out of you. Not at all, particularly not if you want to do a bit of overtime that pushes you into that threshold. We want to encourage people to do overtime. We want to encourage people with these lower income, with huge respect jobs. They're often part-time workers, helping families to make ends meet and get through the ups and downs, the little extras for the kids that make life worth living. Let's raise that personal threshold boldly, decisively. Now, the bean counters in Whitehall will say, we couldn't possibly do that, that would cost too much money. But they don't emphasise enough, in my view, what we call the behavioural effects, how a tax change will affect how people actually behave. So I agree with you, Martin. I think the Tories, if they're going to have any chance of making a fist of really challenging Labour, who are consistently now 20, 25 points ahead in the polls, they've got to be bold. There's a silent majority out there, in my views, my experience, 25 years plus as a journalist, crikey, 30 years as a journalist. God, I'm older than I look. It's my experience that many people out there, the silent majority, they want lower taxes. They want smarter taxes. They want to be able to make money, create wealth, generate security for themselves, their families. They want to contribute to their communities. And in my view, the Tories should be doing more to really emphasise that they are on the side of those people. So I would say for Rishi Sunak, his speech in Coventry today, I think it came from the right place, but he needs to be bolder.
Okay, superb stuff. As ever, Liam Halligan, always on the money. Always a pleasure and never a chore. And coming up, we'll be hearing from a small business owner on what Rishi Sunak's plans could mean for them. You're with Martin Daubney on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweep in and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild, but it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise
and who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:49. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak says he would cut red tape for small businesses during his speech at the Business Connect conference in Warwickshire early today. The Prime Minister said things were still tough for small businesses, but insisted that the government's plan was starting to work. Well, GB News presenter Pip Thompson is with a small business owner now in Nuneaton. Pip, welcome to the show. So let's find out. Did Rishi Sunak give enough away today to content that small business owner where you are on the ground in Nuneaton? Let's find out.
Good afternoon to you, Martin. Well, I met this small business owner, Joe Williams, a little earlier at a small business boot camp run by the Federation of Small Businesses. Anyway, we got chatting and she said, come out to Nuneaton, come and see my gift shop. So I'm here. Now, it's been just off the high street for 9 years. There's also a bed centre here as well. Employs 5 members of staff. Has just today been nominated for Great Gift Retailer of the Year. So it's got a nomination and a visit from GB News all on the same day. There's all sorts of goodies in here as well. Jo also sells online. She was very interested about what Rishi Sunak said, but has it satisfied you, Jo?
Yeah, the news about the apprenticeships is fantastic news. We've had an apprentice previously and she went on to win Apprentice of the Year and Star Pupil of the Year for the whole of the college for Nuneaton, North Warwickshire and Hinckley. And she went from being really quiet to having oodles of confidence. She's gone on, she's done amazing. And
so the government paying for thousands more apprenticeships for you is a goer?
Absolutely. We want to support youngsters coming out of school and older who want to get into retail and learn the ins and outs. It's not just a case of serving customers behind a till.
Something Kemi Badenoch said earlier was that the government's doing everything it can to turbocharge small businesses. Do you see that? I mean, what challenges do you face?
The biggest challenge at the moment, or two of the biggest challenges, are footfall. Nuneaton is undergoing lots of redevelopment, which is fantastic and will be great in the future. But while the development's happening, our footfall has literally halved while the car park has been closed and it's been redeveloped. The other massive impact on us is the cost of electric, which has gone from £250 a month and it can sometimes hit £700 a month. And that is a phenomenal increase. And that's something that we're having to budget for going forward.
Gosh, that is a huge rise, isn't it? What about this raising of the VAT threshold? That's supposed to be a help. Does it help you?
Unfortunately not, because we're above the threshold, so it would be good to have some sort of incentive to have it graded as you get more turnover rather than being set for everybody above that threshold. So that would be something I would be keen for them to look into.
Nuneaton, it is a Tory constituency. It's been Tory since 2010. Sizable majority of 13,000. Has what you've heard today mean that the Tories will get your vote at the election?
It's really difficult to say. They are positive news, and you know that hopefully this will be a positive thing for small businesses. But I need to see what the other parties are going to bring to the offer.
Do you know what Labour might be offering? Have you heard anything? Because I'm not sure.
Not yet, especially for the small businesses. So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with to support the businesses that really keep the country going.
And what do you need, would you say, more than anything? If Rishi Sunak could have, if you'd have written his speech today, what would you have put in it?
Some help with the VAT, corporation tax, especially for the businesses that are literally just above the thresholds, because it's a massive cost to small businesses. And if you could do anything about footfall, especially in Nuneaton, because I'm a champion of Nuneaton, is please can we have our car park back?
Well, that is a problem in many town centres, is where you blooming park. Parking is at a premium in so many places.
Absolutely. Originally, the plans which are directly opposite our shop were to have a multi-storey car park, but funds are getting tied up, and rather than bankrupting the council, that has been scrapped and we're now getting a flat car park. But to be fair, most of our customers prefer a flat car park to a multi-storey, so come on, let's get it done.
Okay, I'm sure lots of people relate to what you're saying there. So there you go, Martin, that's the view of one business owner here in Nuneaton. I'm going to go because I want to have a little poke around. There's so many little goodies in here.
Super. So thank you to Pip Thompson there in Nuneaton, and also Jo Williams. Get her on The Apprentice. She knows what she's talking about. Now, coming up, we'll be hearing from Labour Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper on the party's plan to tackle the migration crisis. A bold plan coming out. 1,000 people, apparently, would be making sure that we get people out of the country. And with the first time that Yvette Cooper has spoken to GB News, looking forward to that. I'm Warren Daubney on GB News. First, it's your weather with Aidan McGibbon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweeping, and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild. But it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time is ticking on your chance to win the Great British Giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Didn't quite believe it and still can't. And if I can win it, anybody can win it.
For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debate, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you and a very happy Monday. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Coming up, we have an interview with the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, and she has told us how Labour will deal with illegal immigration. Is it any better than the government's flagship Rwanda bill, which is fighting for its life in the House of Commons ahead of a huge vote at 8 p.m. this evening? We'll have that throughout the show. And the Prime Minister, meanwhile, comes out fighting, setting out his vision to boost small business. The speculation that Tory MPs are plotting to replace him with Penny Mordaunt are swirling around the corridors of power. And the row over Margaret Thatcher being listed as a contemporary villain alongside Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden in the V&A's display about Punch and Judy. Is that a fair portrayal of the former Prime Minister or a gross insult to Maggie Thatcher's memory? And it's Easter, so of course we've got Easter weather chaos. The two go hand in glove, don't they? Are we in for a wet Easter weekend this year? Feels like it. Well, that's all coming up in your next hour. Thank you for joining on the show. It's always a pleasure to have your company. So we're about to hear from Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, and she has a plan that Labour are announcing today of a 1,000-strong returns and enforcement unit to swiftly remove failed asylum seekers from the country, including foreign criminals. She's hit out at the calamitous costs, the chaos and collapsing confidence in the Conservatives. It sounds like a very conservative policy. We'll have a full exclusive interview on that shortly. I want to hear from you, the usual ways. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you trust the Labour Party on immigration? And anyhow, can it be worse than we've got now? 745,000 last year legally, and plus many more, about an extra 60,000 through the back door. But before all of that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Biddlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the government has started to identify, it says, which illegal migrants will be on the first flight to Rwanda. Downing Street has said today the initial cohort of people is now being contacted, with the Prime Minister still determined, he says, to see the first plane leaving later this spring. MPs are due to vote this evening as well on 10 separate changes to the Rwanda bill suggested by peers from the House of Lords. Rishi Sunak says he's still committed to getting flights off the ground.
It's important that we get the Rwanda scheme up and running because we need to have a deterrent. We need to make it clear that if you come here illegally, you won't be able to stay and we will be able to remove you. That is the only way to properly solve the issue of illegal migration. Now, we've made good progress. Boat numbers were down by a third last year, so that shows that our plan is working. But in order to finish the job, we need the Rwanda scheme through. We're getting it through Parliament. Everyone is trying to block us, including the Labour Party, because they don't have a plan to tackle this problem. We do. I'm determined to see it through, get the deterrent up and running as quickly as possible.
Well, the Prime Minister was also busy announcing plans today to create 20,000 new apprenticeships. He was on a visit to Coventry in the West Midlands. He pledged £60 million worth of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funded training for young people and a reduction in red tape for small businesses. Labour has accused the government of economic failure, but Mr Sunak says action is being taken and the full cost of apprenticeships will be offered to applicants aged 21 and under at small firms from the 1st of April. Small businesses seem to welcome the move.
I think the apprenticeship payment in full would be fantastic. We've had an apprentice before. She did phenomenally well, and but funds have been quite tight the last couple of years, and that's not something that I've been able to enter into again, although I want to. So that is a benefit.
I think there's lots of positives in there. I think there's some great stuff for helping small businesses. For our business, we need a bit more.
The small businesses in the UK will see it as to what it is. It's probably a last-ditch effort to get some confidence back. I don't think he's done enough. I don't think it's going to give the confidence to small businesses.
Well, the Prime Minister's been quite busy today. He's also been rebuffing current speculation about a leadership challenge, saying he's not interested in Westminster politics. Rishi Sunak urged his party to stick to the plan, and he told backbenchers that the economy is turning a corner. He was forced to speak out, though, after rumours suggested right-wing Tories were lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. Meanwhile, the former US President Barack Obama is visiting Downing Street for a private meeting right now. Mr Obama, who served in the White House from 2009 to 2017, smiled and waved before he went into number 10 about an hour ago. A Whitehall source telling GB News he's there for an informal meeting with Rishi Sunak. Now, the former Environment Minister, Zach Goldsmith, has been banned for driving for a year. It's after he was caught breaking the speed limit 7 times driving in London between April and November last year. The Conservative peer was also caught speeding on 2 motorways, most recently in December in his hybrid electric car. He pleaded guilty to all the offences and was fined £5,500 and ordered to pay a surcharge of £2,000 as well as costs. 9 police officers have been recognised for their bravery. They risked their lives rescuing residents from a fire in Windsor in Berkshire.
Get back! Move back from it now! Move back! Move that way! Move that way!
If you're listening on radio, we're looking at body cam footage from Thames Valley Police showing the incident at a caravan park in January 2021. Emergency crews were responding to explosions after homes were set alight. Sergeant James Greehey, who took part in the rescue, said it's the first time he's had a chance to look back at the pictures and properly reflect on just how close he and his colleagues came to death. He said the selfless act was driven by pure instinct. The Foreign Secretary has criticised the Russian elections, saying it wasn't free and fair. Early results show President Putin winning nearly 88% of the vote, giving him a 5th term in office. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says he's behaving like a modern-day Stalin, accusing Putin of stealing the election after having opponents imprisoned or murdered. Thousands of people turned up at polling stations across Russia and in cities across the world to protest against the result. The Kremlin responded by threatening to imprison anyone taking part in the protest for up to 5 years. Former Kremlin advisor and Russian exile Valery Morozov says there is no viable opposition in Russia to Putin.
The problem is that Putin is still keeping Russia moving, developing, or in any case. Well, there is no alternative. There is no people who have ideas, other ideas. You have Putin. Russia is now, if you compare the development of Russia, for example, for January 2023 to this January, it is 4.6% development.
Valery Morozov there. Now, Britain's most successful female Olympian, Dame Laura Kenny, has announced her retirement from professional cycling. The athlete posted the news on Instagram, saying it was time to move on. The 5-time gold medalist had been expected to compete at the Paris Games this summer, but the 31-year-old welcomed her second son last year and said spending time at home with him and her family was proving more important to her. For the very latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Try scanning that QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Martin, back to you.
Thank you, Polly. Now to our top story this hour. As Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has been speaking to GB News, and it comes as the Rwanda bill is once again being debated this afternoon, with a vote happening later this evening around 8 p.m, we believe. And Labour set out its plans on how they would deal with illegal migration.
Well, we need to strengthen our border security and fix the chaos in the asylum system, because under the Conservatives, we've really seen criminal gangs take hold along the Channel, and then this huge soaring backlog with asylum hotel use that is costing the taxpayer billions. So instead of all the gimmicks that we've had from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, our plan is to get a grip. That starts with the new cross-border police to go after the criminal gangs, to smash the gang networks and prevent boats arriving on the French coast in the first place. And then it also means setting up a new returns and enforcement unit, because the returns of failed asylum cases have dropped by 40% since the Conservatives came to power. That means the rules aren't being enforced. We've got to get a grip of that, and that would be part of our plan to clear the backlog, to end asylum hotel use, and also to save the taxpayer billions of pounds as well.
She'll save billions of pounds through not having people staying in hotel rooms and the like, but what will it cost you, this new 1,000-strong returns and enforcement unit?
Well, the new returns and enforcement unit would likely cost in the tens of millions of pounds, but it would be part of this plan that would actually save the taxpayer billions of pounds, because at the moment the Conservative Home Office has actually bust their budget by more than £5 billion. Some of that is around the asylum hotels, some of this is around the Rwanda scheme, which is only going to cover less than 1% of those arriving in the country, to the cost of around £2 million per asylum seeker, and that is the British taxpayer writing those cheques just as part of the gimmicks instead of getting a proper grip.
I think I know you'll say this, but are you saying you would axe the Rwanda bill, the plan, even if it works?
Well, when you've got a scheme that is costing around £500 million to cover, we thought it was going to cover around 300 people, but we hear now in the news that it's only likely to cover around 150 people. Well, you have more people arriving on boats sometimes in a day than that. This is way less than 1%, and this is a failing scheme. All they're trying to do is to get some symbolic flights off before a general election. Those are the words, not my words, but the words of the former immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who said that's all they're trying to do, and all they're trying to do now is also to try and pay volunteers to fill those flights because they've got themselves into such a mess. And that's why I think this just has to be about getting a grip instead. So yeah, we would use that money, instead of putting it into the Rwanda scheme, to putting it into strengthening our border security instead. Let's actually start to tackle some of the problem at source and go after those criminal gangs that are making a fortune from putting lives at risk and undermining our border security.
If it works, though, and maybe thousands are taking off before the November election, even then you might axe it?
Well, the Court of Appeal says it's going to be about 100 people. The current immigration minister has said a few hundred. The former immigration minister said 200. The briefing from the Home Office said 150 people. You know, look, 80,000 people applied for asylum last year in the UK. 2,000 people have arrived in the winter months. We do have to have action to stop these dangerous boat crossings that are putting lives at risk and are undermining our border security. So there's got to be a proper plan to go after the criminal gangs. But, you know, this Rwanda scheme has so far sent more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers to Rwanda. And I think it's just all about headlines and gimmicks. What we want to see is a proper plan to get a grip.
Your unit's called a returns and enforcement agreement. What's the returns bit mean? You can't do a deal, can you, with EU countries? You've got to talk to the EU first.
Well, there's a series of things we need to do. So this has got to be about getting new return agreements in place, and that includes working internationally in order to do that, but also doing the basic casework around individual cases who actually should be being returned at the moment. So the Independent Borders Inspectorate did an inquiry that looked at, for example, the returns of foreign national offenders, found huge failures just in the bureaucracy, in the technology that they were using. At one point, he used the phrase, "This is no way to run a government." Well, you know, I agree with that. This is no way to run a government, and that's why you've got to sort out those systems. So that's why we're saying additional staff in the returns unit to actually make sure that where people have no right to be in the UK, then they are being swiftly returned.
But can you get deals with, say, France or other individual EU nations, or must you go via Brussels?
So we do want to work with France, with other European countries. There used to be agreements that did mean that some people were returned to other European countries. None of that's been happening. That sort of totally collapsed, even though the government promised it would happen. It hasn't happened at all. But I think this is also about recognising the other safe countries across the world that people should be being returned to, and making sure that the rules are being enforced. It did happen. We had much higher levels of returns under the last Labour government. So that's why we know it can be done if you're just really practical about this.
And perhaps before Brexit too, don't forget. In terms of quotas, that sort of idea has been mooted, 100,000 migrants from EU come here. Is that a thing you're looking at, the quota idea?
No, we won't be part of the EU member states quota scheme. We've been very clear about that. We're not an EU member state. We're not going to be an EU member state. Brexit is done, and we're not going to be part of that EU member state quota scheme. There has been a lot of stuff made up about this by the Conservatives, who I think are just trying to distract from the fact that they are failing. They are really badly failing, and it is letting people down. It's undermining our border security. It's putting lives at risk. It's also just costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. They're letting the country down. And all we get from them is rhetoric, headlines, and attempts to blame someone else. We need to get a grip.
There we go, and that was Yvette Cooper speaking to GB News for the first time. Superb stuff, and the man who did that, Chris Hope, GB News political editor, can join me in the studio. And I'm also joined in the studio by Labour MP for Brighton, Kemp Town and Peacehaven, Lloyd Russell-Moore. Thank you very much for joining us. Gentlemen, let's start with you, Chris. Got to say, I saw this policy this morning. Having listened to what Yvette Cooper just had to say, this is the policy that will land well in the Red Wall. It seems to have solutions. It seems to be much cheaper than Rwanda, and she was speaking clearly on the idea that she would get rid of Rwanda. It's overpriced, it's not going to work, and there seems to be some proper detail at last coming out from the Labour Party today.
All viewers and listeners want, Martin, is something that works, that does stop the boats, and this is a different idea, 1,000-strong returns and enforcement agreement. She makes the point that the hotels are costing £8 million of our money every single day. Why not divert some of that through reforms and dealing with this backlog into dealing with trying to work out new returns agreements? I think it's interesting, and she was saying, I said, a crucial question, if Rwanda works, will you still exit? And she said, well, it's not going to work. And she cited 3 or 4 different sources saying 150 to 300 or 400, and that's all we're going to get rid of on those flights back to Rwanda from here. So it won't matter. Money saved will go into this different way of doing it.
Now, in terms of some of the details, she talks about cross-border policing. Well, we've had that for a long time with France. We spent £500 million on that year. That hasn't particularly worked. But this idea of 1,000-strong returns and enforcement unit, it sounds impressive.
But how's it going to work? So if we're the Tories here, they would say, well, you can't negotiate bilaterally with European Union countries. You've got to go through Brussels. And she thinks with a will and a way, with a Labour government more, maybe more attuned with EU for the Remain, although so did the Tory party, by the way. Let's move on from that point. But, more attuned with what could happen. Maybe our country can do a deal with individual countries or through Brussels, other deals. She definitely ruled out the idea of quotas of migrants coming here. Do you remember that big row last year? Would we have 100,000 migrants moved here as part of a deal to combat illegal migration? That is not going to happen. So clearly that's been an idea that was tested and has not passed the test.
OK, let's bring you in now, Lloyd. The Conservative Party is 2 parties on this issue. The Labour Party sure as heck is. This sounds like the kind of thing that might land well in the Red Wall, but it sounds a bit Brexity. It sounds a bit, actually, not like Yvette Cooper. So can Labour be trusted to deliver this?
I think it works both ways. I think it works for those who want to be tough on immigration, and it works on people who want to be tough on the causes of immigration. To bastardize a quote from the Labour of the past, because we all know that people who are hanging around to get their applications seen are putting their lives on hold, and it causes huge problems. We all know when people's applications have been rejected, and if people then hang around, it not only causes huge problems in terms of destitution for those individuals, but it actually also causes huge problems in terms of them being able to put in claims for family life, etc. Because the longer people are here, the longer they end up getting embedded in the community. So it works on a sense of people who arrive here should have quick justice. They should have a quick determination. So it works on that side. But it also, the quicker you do the determination, the easier it is to remove people from the country and return them back to home. And we saw the success of a negotiated deal with Albania. So you can start not just to make deals with with the EU. Most of the origin is not from the EU, is it? But you make deals from origin countries, not from Rwanda, which is not an origin country for most of our refugees, and as we know, it's costing millions of pounds per individual. So I think that this idea that we scrap this gimmick, and we heard earlier on, didn't we, Rishi Sunak is even now just talking about it as something that will try and make it less palatable for people to come here, not actually as something that will work, but actually, if it's only 1% of people you're sending it back, it's not a deterrent.
Yeah, before you come in, Chris, I think it's just worth looking at some of the numbers. Oh, yeah, it has been 541 million quid spent so far on Rwanda with not a single solitary human going there, of course. And as you said, 1.8 million quid per asylum seeker. Why not give them the money? They're like, win the lottery and go. But it's only 36 days of asylum hotel costs at current rates. So it's a big problem, Chris, that needs plenty of money thrown at it.
It does, and it's eye-watering, the numbers we're spending. But my point to you, Lloyd, for your party maybe, is Yvette Cooper says it won't work because it'll only be a few hundred. But if it's a few thousand, will you still accept? What's the point at which you think, OK, we got it wrong, Rwanda works, Labour government would keep it?
Well, I think if you can do it more cheaply and more humanely, then you scrap it. And at the moment, even if you get up to the 1,000 mark, you still are spending an extraordinary huge amount of money on the Rwanda deal. And remember, the Rwanda deal is not a one-way deal. The Rwanda deal does require us to accept the most vulnerable refugees in Rwanda back into...
We're told that's a few dozen, aren't we?
But we're told it's a few dozen, just like we're told that there might be a possibility it's a few thousand. I think when the Rwandans see this, they'll start to say, well, the complex ones, thank you very much, back off to England. And do you want complex cases, or actually is it better to get able people who are at least able to contribute to the economy? I actually think that the whole thing is a bit messed up. The mindset behind it doesn't work. It's not a deterrent, and it is better to say, let's stop wasting time, because we also know there's not just a financial cost.
Yeah.
The more time you get civil servants working on these things, the more arguments you have with it, the more fights that you have with every case, not trying to... is distraction from actually processing things, stopping people being in hotels because you process their claim, and getting that cost down.
OK, Chris, we quickly saw Barack Obama as a Downing Street. Last time he was here, of course, 2016. Britain would be at the back of the queue if they voted Brexit. Why is he here today?
Well, I've been in the afternoon lobbying meeting, getting a readout for number 10. He was here with the Obama Foundation, is doing some work with community groups in London, and he was here to visit. It wasn't signalled or announced by number 10. The first we knew of him being here was when we saw it on our screens on GB News. He was in a personal capacity, and I'll bring you more, whether they went up to the flats or the kids, etc., as soon as I can. It's a good time maybe for Rishi Sunak to show that the UK matters, with a former president dropping in. Of course, he's got his own issues with his own MPs and his own authority with those MPs at the moment. OK, superb. So thanks for joining us, Chris Hope and Lloyd Russell-Moore. Always a pleasure to have you in. Now, we'll have lots more on that story at 5 o'clock, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Vladimir Putin has won a fifth term as Russian president by a landslide victory. What a surprise, of 87%. But, of course, he faced absolutely no credible opposition. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do. If
or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because You know, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospitals Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences that I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it, rather than... It's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So...
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:26. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. So, Vladimir Putin has launched an anti-West rant following his controversial election victory, saying there was no democracy in the West, which is a bit rich. More ominously, though, he warned of World War III if Western troops enter Ukraine. Meanwhile, the UK Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has dubbed him the new Stalin. So, relationships are at an all-time high. To discuss this further, I'm joined now by historian and author Martin Whittock. Martin, welcome to the show. So no great surprises that Putin stood unopposed. No great surprises that he swept to a landslide. But what does it mean for relationships between Putin and the West moving forward?
Well, it plays into the whole narrative that Putin has been developing over, well, in many ways, the last 10 years, really, that the West is a threat, that the Ukraine is a proto-Nazi state, that Russia and its culture and everything to do with Russia is under threat. And the war was foremost and central to his campaign. And basically, he will see this engineered result as showing to the Russian people that they are four square behind him, despite the fact that 40% of Russian GDP is now being spent on the military, completely unsustainable amounts. He is getting sufficient support from China, from India, from Iran to keep him going. But he will continue to develop this narrative boosted by this clearly completely unconvincing result that the West is after him, but the Russian people are behind him, and he's going to continue pushing for, in his term, victory in Ukraine. And he'll talk up the anti-Western rhetoric because it's part of the whole story that he is developing. No doubt he believes it himself as well, because basically it makes the world, particularly the West, the enemy, and any Russian who criticizes him is unpatriotic. And that's very much part of the narrative as well. Putin saying, don't criticize me because you are betraying your country. This is all part of the Putin narrative that's been developed over the last 5 years and particularly the last 10 years as well.
But Martin, he's being called the new Stalin, which may or may not be helpful. But the fact of the matter remains, if you stand against Vladimir Putin as a political opponent, you tend to disappear or die. Is this going to change anytime soon?
I think not. I mean, to be frank about it, as a historian of Russia, both Soviet Russia and the Russian Federation after that, well, looking from the USSR right through to where we are today, Putin is not Stalin. We are not seeing mass killings of the kind of numbers that we saw under Stalin, nothing remotely like that. He does not have that power, that energy that Stalin had. But we must not delude ourselves either, that basically the Putin regime has has become increasingly brutal, increasingly authoritarian. We saw what happened to Navalny. We've seen what's happened to other people, from the Salisbury poisoning right through to assassinations in the heart of Europe. It is increasingly difficult for any Russian.
OK, and we're cutting now to live pictures. That's Vladimir Putin in Moscow celebrating. A sizable crowd there, clapping away, as you'd expect. Good turnout. He's just on a victory parade in Moscow. Martin, are you still there? Can you see the... No, Martin's gone. Martin, these things are... How stage-managed are these moments? There's a sizable turnout there, but is that stage-managed?
Very much so. Reports that are coming in this afternoon, our time, early evening Russian time, Moscow time, we're talking about university students from some distance away being bussed into this area. We'll see people from state enterprises being bussed in. We may even be seeing military personnel out of uniform being bussed in. These things are staged. These things are organised. These things are not spontaneous. They're no more spontaneous than the election, and they are designed to give the impression of mass support for Putin. But we should not believe this, because these are organised and managed events in order to support and maintain a particular view that Russia stands foursquare behind the president. No, these are not genuine events. There will be believers there, of course there will be. There will be Putin supporters, of course there will be. But the mass numbers owe more to the logistics machine of the Kremlin than they do to spontaneously going out in the spring evening to this big rally.
Yeah, and Martin Whittock, while we may have the Eurovision Song Contest, they appear to have a small platoon of soldiers in full flax with their chests puffed out and their medals on display, singing in close harmony support for Vladimir Putin. It does feel terribly confected and concocted, Martin.
Yes, very much so. So whilst he's no Stalin, he draws a lot. Remember, he was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB stationed in East Germany before the fall of the Soviet Union. He draws on this authoritarian, Stalinist, if you like, communist background of organising people, putting on big rallies, trying to get a particular view across. But we must remember, of course, that Putin is not a communist, but one of the people that he beat was a supine Communist Party representative. He is now a Russian nationalist, and he is pulling on all the strings of Russian nationalism to try to create this patriotic surge behind him. So, yeah, the military will be there singing, there'll be people there in national costume. The whole idea is Russia is united and the West is against us. This is, sadly, the Russia of Putin. 20 years ago, it really looked like we were building bridges with Russia. Those bridges have been well and truly burnt, but on the Russian side, particularly, of course, since the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And we're seeing that played out now in Moscow and in these other major stage-managed events, including stage-managed elections. He's now the longest ruling Russian leader, I believe, since Catherine the Great in the 18th century.
Well, that's a fascinating fact to finish on there. Historian and author Martin Whittock, thank you very much for giving us your expert insight into that victory for Vladimir Putin. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including Thatcher in the same league as Hitler and bin Laden. Well, that's the V&A's assessment. Should the museum have its funding cut? But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour: the government has begun to identify which illegal migrants will be on the first flight to Rwanda. Downing Street says the initial cohort of people is now being contacted, with the Prime Minister still determined, he says, to see the first plane departing later this spring. MPs are due to vote this evening on 10 separate changes to the Rwanda bill suggested by peers from the House of Lords. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's been busy rebuffing speculation about a leadership challenge, saying he isn't interested with Westminster politics. Speaking in Warwickshire, Rishi Sunak urged his party to stick to the plan and told backbenchers the economy is turning a corner. He was forced to speak out after rumours suggested right-wing Tories were lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. And the Prime Minister's announced plans to create 20,000 new apprenticeships, pledging £60 million worth of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funded training for young people and a reduction in red tape for small businesses taking them on. He says the government will pay the full cost of apprenticeships for people aged 21 or under at small firms from the 1st of April. And the former US President Barack Obama is inside Downing Street this afternoon for a private meeting, we understand. Mr Obama, who was president from 2009 to 2017, smiled and waved to the cameras just before going into number 10, just after 3 o'clock this afternoon. A Whitehall source has told us here at GB News he's there for an informal meeting with Rishi Sunak whilst he's in London. Those are the latest top stories. Do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, hundreds of asylum seekers have been moved on after camping outside of Dublin for months. But guess what? They're all coming back. More of that very soon. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed foods? Boris Johnson is calling on the government to do this. In his Daily Mail column, the former Prime Minister says that people don't know what they're feeding their families and there's too many extra ingredients. That's why I'm asking, should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed food? Well, joining me now to discuss, Steve Miller, former presenter of Fat Families, Helena Davidson, campaigner and policy expert at the Vegan Society. Right, so I'm going to start with you. Steve Miller, what do you think?
Oh, I'm applauding Boris today. Good on you, mate. And the reason for that is we know that the research on the warnings on cigarettes, I should say, when those warnings were visual, they worked very well. The second reason on a practical level is that we need to stop looking and listening before we start, grazing and putting things in the trolley. And the third thing is that these kind of signs, or these warnings, I should say, are kind of hypnotic. They trigger the emotion. So they're much more likely to get people to think and maybe resist.
Yeah, so at the Vegan Society, we're broadly in favour of increasing consumer knowledge when it comes to the nutritional value of people's food. But I think it's important to mention that ultra-processed food isn't an issue that's exclusive to vegans. And whilst most meat alternatives will fall into the ultra-processed food category, it largely depends on how we're going to look at how UPFs are going to be assessed, because vegan alternatives that fall under ultra-processed foods, they're actually, on average, healthier than meat products or ultra-processed foods that contain animal products. Really? So I think it depends on how we look at it. We might have to take a closer look at the nutritional profile of individual foods rather than the level of processing.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:38. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, Dublin police have cleared hundreds of migrants from a makeshift campsite in the centre of Dublin on Sunday. Around 200 asylum seekers were moved from the camp outside of a government office to a new site outside of the Irish capital. Now, the asylum seekers have been camping outside the International Protection Office on Mount Street for months, awaiting their applications for international protection to be processed. Well, joining me now to discuss this is former Labour advisor Kevin Marr. Kevin, welcome to the show. Astonishing scenes. It looked like a sort of social cleansing. Bulldozers taking these tents, putting them into the back of garbage trucks, moving these men, ferrying them out of town on coaches 20 kilometres away so they didn't spoil the St Patrick's Day parade pictures. But now they're all traipsing back into Dublin, Kevin, and worse, the world's media is watching. What the hell is going on?
It's a bit of a shambles in Dublin. There are several things going on. I mean, what happened over the weekend, and I saw footage of this, somebody walked along the whole length of this kind of, we would have called these cardboard cities, I guess, in the 80s. But the kind of these pop-up tents that people have got. One after the other, after the other, after the other. A lot of them asylum seekers that are in Ireland. The Irish government doesn't have the capacity to deal with the numbers of migrants that it's getting, and rather than do something about the supply that it's getting, it just keeps letting these people come in and doesn't have anywhere to put them, and it's causing a major problem in Irish society. We've seen lots of disturbances, lots of protests, some buildings being burnt that were earmarked to put asylum seekers in. Now, this is a very febrile situation in Ireland, and it stems from the fact, two things. One, that the housing market in Ireland is completely out of control. So over the last decade, for example, wages have grown about 27%, house prices have grown about 75%, and rents 90%. It's a really difficult situation, and it reflects actually the strength of the Irish economy. The Irish economy is booming, but supply and demand in the housing market isn't kept pace, and the government's frankly asleep on the watch and not doing very much about it. And it also reflects what's happening is that Ireland's political elite and some of its media elite as well are quite happy to allow this situation to continue, to sort of burnish their liberal credentials, because some of the leading lights in the Irish government, frankly, have got their eyes on big international jobs. So they're out there writing checks that then the Irish people are expected to pay. And it's this massive disconnect between the political elite at the top of this current government, which is led by the two old parties of Irish politics, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. Leo Varadkar, people may be familiar with, Micheál Martin as well as the leader of Fianna Fáil. You know, they're looking past Irish politics and for a big international job. That's what's going on. And they, as I say, they are going around the place making commitments that Ireland cannot deliver sustainably. And that's the nub of the problem.
And meanwhile, Kevin, anybody who objects is called far-right or racist. There have been large-scale protests in and around Dublin and nationwide about this fact. We've seen outbreaks of violence, of course, in Dublin. We saw police cars set fire to after that multiple stabbing a few months ago. See those pictures on our screen now. The question is, Kevin, if we have a political class in Ireland completely out of touch with the working classes, with the people who are affected, who can't get a house, what does that create? Does it create a void for something new?
It does. I mean, it's very interesting to look at the opinion polls in Irish politics, which you know, for the last 4 years has had Sinn Féin top the pops. They won the actual popular vote in the last general election in February 2020, and it's very likely there's got to be an Irish general election in the course of the next year, a bit like we have, of course, in Britain. It's very likely that Sinn Féin features as part of that next government because they've got radical proposals on housing. It's not really anything to do with any other issue that Sinn Féin may be familiar to voters about. It's really about housing. It's way past a problem for the Irish working class. It's a problem for the Irish middle class. It's a problem for the Irish professional class. Everybody is feeling this problem. And the bizarre thing is that the Irish government, knowing that it's got this problem, could do something about it. The Irish public finances are in rude health at the moment, so much so that the talk in Dublin is of Ireland creating a sovereign wealth fund. It's got so much money from corporation tax receipts, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it could fix this problem very easily. But the trouble is, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the two old corrupt parties of Irish politics, you know, are sustained by the class of people that have got all these houses that are renting them out and making an absolute fortune. So there is no interest to address this problem. But at the same time, you're right. There is no Irish far right in effect. There are some right wing people clearly, but when I look at these protests outside centres that have been designated to dump 50 asylum seekers and next to a children's nursery or whatever. No thought gone into it whatsoever. The people leading these protests are just ordinary people, mainly women. They're sat around a little campfire in deck chairs, passing a thermos flask around with an Irish flag and playing Irish folk songs. This is not swastikas and skinheads. This idea that all these people are, troglodytes and political extremists, it just isn't true. They are people who are profoundly fed up because their government is letting them down.
Superb stuff. Kevin, our breath of fresh air, former Labour advisor and an expert on the geopolitical scene in Ireland. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us today on GB News. That was great stuff. Now, coming up, was Margaret Thatcher actually a villain? Well, the V&A Museum faces a huge backlash after listing the former Prime Minister alongside Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden. You couldn't make it up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweeping and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild, but it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:48. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, London's Victoria and Albert Museum is facing criticism over an exhibition that puts former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the same light as Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden. You couldn't make it up. A special exhibition at the V&A on British humour discussing Punch and Judy puppets said the following. Over the years, the evil character in this seaside puppet show has shifted from the devil to unpopular public figures, including Adolf Hitler, Margaret Thatcher and Osama bin Laden, to offer contemporary villains. Well, It certainly got people talking, and not always in a good way. And joining me now to discuss this in the studio is former Labour MP Dennis McShane. Had to say, Dennis, sniggering your way through that entire introduction.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, you put these 17-year-old curators in charge of giant Victorian museums, and they come up with really wacky, unthought-through ideas. Now, I actually think Margaret Thatcher would have been dying with laughter, turning in her grave, because obviously all the people getting pompous hot under the bother, all these American fanatical Margaret Thatcher heritage curators getting so pompous about it, none of them obviously saw Spitting Image. None of them actually were ever up in the north of England. I was there in Sheffield on Friday morning with my daughter, and believe me, you can't mention Margaret Thatcher up there. I'm just telling you a bit of geographical history. I think she was an extraordinary Prime Minister. There were necessary reforms that Britain absolutely needed, as they do again today. I don't think the way she carried them out was as skillful as all other economies that had to shed heavy industry and get unions into a better shape. But that said, she left a mark on Britain that was indelible, that will echo throughout history.
And a lot of people in those communities you talk about voted for the Conservative Party for the first time in 2019, and the legacy of Margaret Thatcher in those communities was put to one side. But I guess the point here is people wouldn't be laughing about it in the political arena on the left, say if it was Jeremy Corbyn next to an Ayatollah. They'd be clutching their pearls and saying this is absolutely terrible. And it's not about satire. We should be allowed to satirise and take the mickey out of anybody and tweak the noses of the powerful and the pompous. But putting Thatcher alongside Hitler and Bin Laden, you have to admit,
that's daft and silly. Actually, some people in the Labour Party would consider comparing poor old Jeremy to an Ayatollah as rather an insult to the Ayatollah. So I think we should all laugh a lot more in politics and get a little bit less worked up about it. But the Thatcher heritage needs a proper analysis. Of course, from my point of view, you know, Martin, it's not exactly a secret that I'm fairly pro-European. She smashed through every protectionist rule in Europe and gave us freedom of movement, investment, trade anywhere, mass migration. And she did all that for very good economic reasons. And I think that part of the Thatcher heritage, of course, has been buried under the silly nationalism we've got from some of the people now claiming her heritage. It's a much more complicated, multifaceted heritage than some of her sort of wet and more shaky admirers think.
It was actually Tony Blair that opened the doors to mass migration, your old boss. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked on that. Let's talk about the fact people are saying that the V&A, which gets 67 million quid of public money last year alone, should lose that money, should be defunded. Should it be, or should we just get a sense of humour?
I get a sense of humour. The VA is an enormous visitor attraction. I mean, London is busy with visitors. It's one of the few bits of our economic system that's still working well, apart from the ghastly increased tax that Mr Sunak's insisting we must all pay if they buy goods here in Britain. And the V&A is incredibly popular. It's very skillful. It brings in young people. As I say, I expect this was a young person's idea. It probably was.
I'm afraid we have to move on. Dennis McShane, we have a statement to read out for the V&A, and it says this: the V&A is always open to feedback from our visitors. In response to some concerns around a caption in the Punch and Judy case of our Laughing Matters display telling the story of British satire and comedy, we will review the relevant label text and update the wording if necessary.
Pompous.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Now, moving swiftly on, a forecaster has warned that the UK is more likely to see snow at Easter than it is at Christmas. The beginning of spring has brought with it an onslaught of heavy rain, and conditions could be getting worse ahead of the Easter holidays. Well, joining me now to tell us more is the Met Office meteorologist and presenter Aidan McGivern. Aidan, a simple question: why is it blooming well raining so much?
It has not stopped raining since July, it feels like, and Yeah, there is more rain to come, unfortunately. I mean, it often rains in March. March, let's face it, is a miserable month. But we've had a very wet winter. Winter was the wettest on record for some counties across Wales, England, and northern Scotland. And some of that was down to El Nino. You might have heard of El Nino. It's this oscillation in temperature and pressure patterns in the Pacific. And during the winter, it swung in a particular direction that often warms up the atmosphere and the oceans and brings more rainfall to the UK. It's not the only reason. There are other reasons. One of them is warmer than average sea surface temperatures surrounding the UK. But of course, our weather is highly variable in the winter, so a lot of it is just down to random variability.
And of course, Aidan, before people start banging on that it's climate change, it's worth pointing out the wettest ever March was in 1947.
We're not on course for the wettest ever March this year, but it has, in some places, already received its monthly average. And we're halfway through. So we've had certainly a wetter than average March so far, more rain on the way. On the point that it's more likely to snow in the Easter, that's a statistical thing looking at past years, and it's only true when Easter occurs in March, which I guess this year is the case. However, we're not looking at snow this Easter. Unfortunately, more rain.
OK, Aidan McGivern, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Now, after this, we'll have all the latest on Rishi Sunak's battle for Rwanda. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. And first, it's your weather with that man again, Aidan McGivern.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweep in and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild, but it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still time to win our giveaway packed with seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won. Cash to make your bank account bloom. Plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very happy Monday afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Coming up in today's show, GB News understands that the first migrants to be deported to Rwanda have already begun to be identified by the government as the infamous bill is debated today in the Commons. We're expecting a vote on that around about 8 p.m. this evening. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister has come out fighting today, setting out his vision to boost small business. The speculation is growing that some Tory MPs are plotting to replace him with a certain Penny Mordaunt, the current front runner. And the BBC has come under fire once again, this time for rewriting the plots of Agatha Christie stories and injecting forced diversity. Is the corporation committing crimes against the source material? Have they completely lost the plot? And Easter weather chaos. It's Easter, of course, we're having weather chaos. Are we in for yet another wet and wild Easter weekend this year? That's all coming in your next hour. Welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Please get in touch with all your usual views, the usual ways. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you think a single asylum seeker will be flown to Rwanda? It's being voted tonight. I've been saying all along, I think there's more chance of me flying to the moon, and I'm no astronaut. I remain to stand corrected. That vote, 8 o'clock tonight. Let me know what you think. Do you have any faith in this scheme? £500 million and rising so far. Get in touch with your thoughts. I'll read them out before the end of the show. But now it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you and good evening. Well, the government has started to identify, it says, which illegal migrants will be on the first flight to Rwanda. Downing Street said today the initial cohort of people is now being contacted, and the Prime Minister says he's still determined to see the first plane leaving later this spring. MPs are due to vote this evening on 10 separate changes to the Rwanda bill, however. They're the changes suggested by peers from the House of Lords. But Rishi Sunak says he's still committed to getting flights off the ground.
It's important that we get the Rwanda scheme up and running because we need to have a deterrent. We need to make it clear that if you come here illegally, you won't be able to stay and we will be able to remove you. That is the only way to properly solve the issue of illegal migration. Now, we've made good progress. Boat numbers were down by a third last year, so that shows that our plan is working. But in order to finish the job, we need the Rwanda scheme through. We're getting it through Parliament. Everyone is trying to block us, including the Labour Party, because they don't have a plan to tackle this problem. We do. I'm determined to see it through, get the deterrent up and running as quickly as possible.
Well, responding, the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper told GB News the government needs to get a grip on the situation.
We need to strengthen our border security and fix the chaos in the asylum system, because under the Conservatives we've really seen criminal gangs take hold along the Channel, and then this huge soaring backlog with asylum hotel use that is costing the taxpayer billions. So instead of all the gimmicks that we've had from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, our plan is to get a grip. That starts with the new cross-border police to go after the criminal gangs, to smash the gang networks and prevent boats arriving on the French coast in the first place.
Yvette Cooper. Now, the Prime Minister announced plans today to create 20,000 new apprenticeships on a visit to Coventry in the West Midlands. He pledged £60 million worth of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funded training for young people and reduction in red tape for small businesses. Labour accused the government, though, of economic failure. But Mr Sunak says action is being taken and the full cost of apprenticeships will be offered to applicants aged under 21 at small firms from the 1st of April. Small business owners seem to have welcomed the move.
I think the apprenticeship payment in full would be fantastic. We've had an apprentice before. She did phenomenally well, but funds have been quite tight the last couple of years, and that's not something that I've been able to enter into again, although I want to. So that is a benefit.
I think there's lots of positives in there. I think there's some great stuff for helping small businesses. For our business, we need a bit more.
To the small businesses in the UK, we'll see it as to what it is. It's probably a last-ditch effort to get some confidence back. I don't think he's done enough. I don't think it's going to give the confidence to small businesses.
Well, despite that announcement, the Prime Minister's been busy rebuffing current speculation about a leadership challenge today, saying he's not interested in the politics of Westminster. Rishi Sunak urged his party instead to stick to the plan, telling backbenchers the economy is turning a corner. He was forced, though, to speak out after rumours suggested right-wing Tories may be lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. The former US President Barack Obama has left Downing Street after seeing the Prime Minister for a private meeting today. Mr Obama, who served in the White House from 2009 to 2017, smiled and waved before he went in to number 10, and indeed when he emerged just after 4 o'clock this afternoon. A Whitehall source telling GB News he was there for an informal meeting with Rishi Sunak. Now, the former Environment Minister, Zac Goldsmith, has been banned from driving for a year. It's after he was caught breaking the speed limit 7 separate times, driving in London between April and November last year. The Conservative peer was also caught speeding on 2 motorways, most recently in December, in his hybrid electric car. He pleaded guilty to all the offences and was fined £5,500, plus a surcharge of £2,000 as well as costs. Now, 9 police officers have been recognised for their bravery after they risked their lives rescuing residents from a caravan fire in Windsor in Berkshire.
Get back! Move back from it now! Move back! Move that way! Move that way!
If you're listening on radio, we're looking at Thames Valley Police body cam footage of that incident which happened at a caravan park in 2021. Emergency crews were called to an explosion after one of the mobile homes there was set alight. Sergeant James Greehey, who took part in the rescue, said it was the first time he'd looked back at the video and properly reflected on just how close he and his colleagues came to death. He said the selfless act was driven by pure instinct. And lastly, Britain's most successful female Olympian, Dame Laura Kenny, has announced her retirement from professional cycling. The athlete posted the news on her Instagram page, saying it was time to move on. She's already won 5 gold medals and was expected to compete at the Paris Games this summer, but she welcomed her second son last year and said spending time at home with her son and her family was proving much more important to her now. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on the screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Martin, back to you.
Thank you, Polly. Now let's get cracking into our top story this hour. And the Prime Minister has today come out fighting for his political survival once again. In a speech, he set out a plan to boost British small businesses, and it came with growing speculation that some Tory MPs are plotting once again to replace him, this time with Penny Mordaunt. Well, Rishi Sunak urged his fellow MPs to back him and stick to the plan. Here he was speaking to journalists earlier.
Conservatives are united in wanting to deliver a brighter future for our country, and that's why we're cutting people's taxes, £900 for a typical person in work. We're increasing the state pension by £900 in just a few weeks. We're in the middle of one of the biggest expansions of free childcare that our country's seen. We're getting the number of boats down by a third last year, tackling illegal migration, and today announcing new numbers of apprenticeships, supporting small businesses. These are all the things that matter to people, and we are absolutely united in delivering for the country on these important matters.
When it comes to election funding, why would you take £5 million from someone who you've said made racist comments?
He's already apologised for these comments, and my point of view is when someone apologises genuinely, expresses remorse, that should be accepted, and that's that.
When is the earliest those planes will take off to take asylum seekers to Rwanda?
Yeah, I'm still committed to the timeline that I set out previously, which was we aim to get a flight off in the spring. It's important that we get the Rwanda scheme up and running because we need to have a deterrent. We need to make it clear that if you come here illegally, you won't be able to stay and we will be able to remove you. That is the only way to properly solve the issue of illegal migration. Now, we've made good progress. Boat numbers were down by a third last year, so that shows that our plan is working. But in order to finish the job, we need the Rwanda scheme through. We're getting it through Parliament. Everyone is trying to block us, including the Labour Party, because they don't have a plan to tackle this problem. We do. I'm determined to see it through, get the deterrent up and running as quickly as possible.
July or autumn for a general election?
No, I spoke about this last week and many times before, but what matters is the choice at that election, the substance. And as we've seen over the past few weeks, and we'll continue to see this week, our plan is working. Taxes are being cut by £900 for a typical person in work, the state pension going up by £900, the number of boat crossings down by a third, waiting lists starting to come down. Those are the things that we're focused on, and if we stick with that plan, I can deliver a brighter future for everyone in our country. That's the choice at the election, and that's what we'll deliver.
Well, is it me or is Rishi Sunak getting greyer around the hairline? And who can blame him? Let's bring in our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, our plan is working. Our plan is working. Our plan is working. It's starting to feel a bit like Brexit means Brexit. You know, strong and stable leadership. The repetition of phraseology seems to go hand in glove with parliamentarians, prime ministers who feel they're on a bit of a wobble. The polls are saying that. 23-point difference poll out today behind the Labour Party. And now rumours swirling of yet another potential leadership challenge. 40 letters, we believe, have gone in, 53 needed. Penny Mordaunt. Do you feel like the vultures are circling around Rishi Sunak now or not?
Well, the mood in the Conservative Party is definitely very low indeed. I don't think I've ever known it be lower. The Conservatives are trailing 23 points in the polls. They're at their lowest since Liz Truss's disastrous budget, their lowest ever under Rishi Sunak. And there are those MPs who are saying that actually, although they have thought up until now that the worst thing they could possibly do would be to change leaders, have a fourth leader in as many years, now they're kind of thinking perhaps the moment has come for a final roll of the dice. I think those are pretty small conversations going on within pretty small groups within the party. I don't think there's a sort of concerted plot to get rid of the Prime Minister. But I think it might get to that point after those local elections. If there is to be a crunch point, that's when it would be. We are all expecting the Conservatives to do very, very badly indeed on those local elections on the 2nd of May. And there was a rumour for a long time that the Prime Minister would hold a general election on that day. And you can see the argument for that, basically rip the plaster off all in one go. As it is, he has ruled out that general election in May, meaning the Conservatives are going to have to face some pretty challenging local elections before a general election. And it could be between May and October, with a long parliamentary recess, that silly season building up in between. It could be that Conservatives think enough's enough, now's the time to act.
And meanwhile, Olivia, yet another vote tonight, 8 p.m. expected on Rwanda, with echoes of Brexit, the Groundhog Day, round round and round we go. The lawyers, the activists, all out to stop it. We're expecting this to get through tonight, though?
We are expecting it to get through. The Commons are going to be voting on the 10 amendments that were made in the Lords to the bill. Those 10 amendments are essentially there to water down the bill. The Commons, the Conservatives, although it's quite easy to forget this, do actually have a big majority in the House of Commons, and it is expected that they will just vote down all 10 of those amendments. There's a possibility that a couple of those amendments might get through, in which case it'll go back to the Lords, but the expectation is that even if it gets to that point, the sort of conservative-minded peers will sort of bother to turn up to the House of Lords and will eventually vote down those amendments. So if it doesn't get through today, and I think it's very likely that it does, it will get through very soon indeed. But that is far from the end of the road for Rishi Sunak. We are expecting lawyers to poke holes in the bill, and we're possibly expecting the Rwandan government itself to poke holes in the bill. They've said that they only want to take a handful of migrants in the first place to allow the scheme time to bed in. I'm sure that's not going to go down very well with the government over here.
Well, they probably thought it would be easy money, easy money from Britain, and instead it's been a bit of a calamitous PR nightmare. Interesting how Rishi Sunak said the Labour Party don't have a plan. Well, earlier on we spoke to Yvette Cooper, who is, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary, and she did lay out a plan to Christopher Hope. Let's have a listen to what she had to say to us earlier.
Well, there's a series of things we need to do. So this has got to be about getting new return agreements in place, and that includes working internationally in order to do that, but also doing the basic casework around individual cases who actually should be being returned at the moment. So the Independent Borders Inspectorate did an inquiry that looked at, for example, the returns of foreign national offenders, found huge failures just in the bureaucracy, in the technology that they were using. At one point, he used the phrase, "This is no way to run a government." Well, I agree with that. This is no way to run a government, and that's why you've got to sort out those systems. So that's why we're saying additional staff in the returns unit to actually make sure that where people have no right to be in the UK, then they are being swiftly returned.
But can you get deals with, say, France or other individual EU nations, or must you go via Brussels?
So we do want to work with France, with other European countries. There used to be agreements that did mean that some people were returned to other European countries. None of that's been happening. That sort of totally collapsed, even though the government promised it would happen. It hasn't happened at all. But I think this is also about recognising the other safe countries across the world that people should be being returned to, and making sure that the rules are being enforced.
Well, that was Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary, speaking earlier to Chris Hope, political editor of GB News. Got to say, Olivia, sounds tough. 1,000-strong returns and enforcement unit conjures up images of boots through doors. Should land well in the red wall, or is it all window dressing of what we've already heard before?
I would say that it is window dressing of what we've heard before. I mean, the Labour Party has sharpened up its immigration policy over the last few months. There was a time last year when they were considering becoming part of the EU returns arrangement, whereby we would take a quota of migrants in who'd land on EU shores in exchange for sending back those who'd land on our shores. They have ruled that out. They are now talking up this grand new unit that they're going to have. They did actually announce a couple of months ago that they would employ 1,000 new caseworkers to try to get to the bottom of this issue. But of course, the idea of 1,000 new civil servants, 1,000 new pen pushers, perhaps doesn't go down so well in the red wall than the new way that Yvette Cooper has dressed it up now.
Yeah, because returns and enforcement units, that says to me riot shields, bother boots, but actually it could be a bunch of clipboards.
Yeah, exactly. Returns enforcement unit does sound pretty powerful. Definitely an improvement on what they said before, which was just 1,000 new caseworkers employed by the Home Office. I think we can expect to see pen pushers rather than boots on the ground.
But I wonder if, Olivia, at this stage, I mean, look at the numbers, £541 million so far spent on Rwanda. That's £1.8 million each for every asylum seeker. Not a single person has been sent to Rwanda. Are voters at the stage now where they're so fed up, they're so desperate, they're kind of so divided on being offered these plans that don't work that the Labour Party might start to woo them just by offering some hope, any hope?
Well, the Conservative Party's argument, which does go down well with some voters, is that you don't actually need very many migrants to be deported to Rwanda for this policy to actually work. The idea behind it, of course, is that it is a deterrent. If you even manage to get a couple of hundred migrants off the ground, you can't really be thinking about it in terms of price per migrant. The whole policy is supposed to work so that migrants see other migrants being deported to Rwanda and decide that it simply isn't worth it for them to cross the channel. That's the Conservatives' argument. I mean, as you say, it is becoming a little bit farcical. It was over 2 years, 2 prime ministers ago, that Boris Johnson first started talking about this plan. And as yet, it hasn't really come to anything. I've spoken to some Conservative MPs who quite like the Rwanda plan as an idea. The idea of offshoring migration seems quite sensible to them. But they're confused about why Rishi Sunak has chosen to make this front and centre of his illegal immigration policy. It was never going to be a quick fix. Rwanda could never have taken even a fraction of the number of migrants who are coming over to these shores. And perhaps instead of bigging up this as a sort of silver bullet solution, he should have talked about his own successes. The deal that he made with the Albanian Prime Minister, for example, has meant that the number of Albanian migrants coming over here has gone down by 70%. But Rwanda, like it or not, now is the front and centre of the Conservatives' immigration policy, and the voters will judge them on that.
OK, so Olivia Early, thank you very much, and they will judge them tonight. 8 o'clock, we're expecting that vote to happen. Will it get through? People suspect that it will, but will it have any teeth? That's the big question. We'll have that all through the evening here on GB News. Now, you get lots more on that story on our website. And thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got all the breaking news and the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from GB News. Now, spring is in the air, when it's not raining at least, and so is your chance to win a garden gadget package, a shopping spree, and an incredible 12,345 quid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tax-free moolah. Here's how you can make all of that stuff yours.
We've got cash, treats and a spring shopping spree to be won in a great British giveaway. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Great stuff, Philly Boots. Now, the BBC has come under fire once again, this time for rewriting the plots of Agatha Christie stories. They're murdering them through woke. More on that shortly. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Absenteeism. And parents whose children miss a week or more of school face increased fines in a government drive to tackle absence.
This is another one of those government policies which has done nothing to improve the education of our children. In fact, since this was originally introduced some 10 years ago, the educational standards for our children, the 11-year-olds who can't read when they go up to primary school, have got worse and worse and worse. So it's not working. So what do? They just increase the fine, like that may make it work. Most of the parents who get fined are taking their kids out so they can take them on a holiday before the holiday companies push the prices up. And frankly, as a parent, if I've got a £600 discount on my holiday versus a £60 fine, I'm going to go for the £60
You'll suffer
fine.
the fine.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the other huge absence that children had recently during COVID. Schools were closed for months and months on end. online learning was really not making up for that. So how could, it's very difficult for the government to say it was fine for us to take your kids out of school for months, but if you take them off for a few days to go to Disneyland, then you are the worst parent ever and you should
But also,
be
it's the pandemic that caused some of the problems with absenteeism now.
Absolutely.
Because the mental health issues that some of these children now have.
And there are tens of thousands of children, they call them ghost children, that have simply disappeared from the school register. So it would be nice. It's really, really scary situation. I'm not saying that the government is, taking great measures.
Well,
to
I think one of their plans is to have a national register, which would help with that.
Which would definitely help. But I think they can't deal with the real problem, so they're going after actually perfectly, decent parents who are just taking the odd day off, to save money, frankly.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. The time is 5:24. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, the BBC should stop straying from Agatha Christie's storylines or come up with their own ideas. Fair play, and that's the words of Andrew Wilson, an author and expert on the works of Britain's most loved crime writer. This comes as BBC adaptations of Christie's mysteries have come under fire for straying from the original text. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the journalist and broadcaster and the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle.
Hi, Martin.
Peter,
yes.
Always a pleasure to have you in the studio. So we see diversity everywhere. You can't escape it. Some may say it's a good thing to reflect the diverse society that we are. But when you're taking liberties with classic piece of literature and even weaving in Nigerian immigrants in the place of retired British policemen, as we saw in the plot of Murder is Easy, is this a step too far?
Well, I think what it is, we sort of all know what's going on here, really, Martin. I mean, I think when it comes to, first of all, changing of the plots of these things, the fact is that all it shows is that there's a real major dearth of creative talent. Because what's happening is, whether it's Agatha Christie or any other great classic, they get a kind of writer in to reimagine it or shape it in a different way. And you sort of feel, look, why don't you do your own plays? Why don't you write your own novels? Why don't you come up with your own sort of legendary heroes? Why all this tinkering around? And you might say, well, that is... it's not terribly important. I think it is, actually, because for one good reason. You mentioned their Murder is Easy, and that was a Nigerian guy playing the lead in that, which is meant to be a white, policeman, retired policeman. And the fact is that it seems to me that the real targets for this kind of thing are things that are very identifiably English, real popular English institutions, sort of, Agatha Christie, P.G. Wodehouse, or even James Bond, may I say. And, we see it, like we've seen it this weekend, with the fuss about the paintings of our landscapes that happened in Cambridge. They put these landscapes in an exhibition, and then they sort of said, well, this sort of summons up dark nationalistic feelings. It's everything that people popularly associate with with England, particularly, in a nice way, is sort of under attack, and it's kind of relentless. What I find particularly irritating about this as well is that the makers of these programmes, they take the Agatha Christie, they tend to be very proud of the authenticity of the programmes. You know, they get the costumes absolutely right, they get all the cars right, you know, all the cutlery right and everything, and then they go and make ridiculous casting decisions which would not have happened at the time and could not possibly have happened.
Yeah, and we often see, you know, dramas set in the 1940s looking more like modern-day Islington, don't we? And is this, do you think, then, specifically set out to target things which we cherish?
Yes.
You mentioned Agatha Christie. We also see the same with Winston Churchill's attacks and the flag.
It's all those things in the popular imagination. It's a very popular idea of Englishness, Britishness, but I think these are quite specifically English. As I said, with the landscape, that's another one. Every year, doubtless I will come on in September to talk to you about the last night of the proms. We have that now every year, and it's usually emanating from the BBC, but not only from the BBC. And it's sort of daring people to protest. It's daring them to notice. And therefore, you have to kind of say, well, actually, I'll have to ignore that somehow. It doesn't seem right to me somehow, but I'll have to ignore it. And it's therefore undermining, it's constantly undermining, you know, popular ideas of English tradition and what is Englishness in the popular imagination.
And of course, this is a one-way street. We would never see, for example, a white actor cast as Nelson Mandela, would we?
No, of course not. You wouldn't have a production of, say, Porgy and Bess or whatever on the BBC with white actors. Absolutely no chance. It's entirely one way. And indeed, if it were the other way, it would be called cultural appropriation.
And is this ever going to stop? Or is it, as you say, specifically designed to rile us, to make us take the bait, and we get called racist and gammon?
Oh, yes, you get called all that kind of stuff. I think it is actually not to rile us, but actually to make a political point. It is to show, really, what is considered to be the right and acceptable ideology for our time. And this is, and in answer to your question, Martin, no, I don't think it will stop. So far as the BBC is concerned, the BBC, whatever it might say every so often, is totally unreformable. Frankly, I think the licence fee should be scrapped, you know. But I think that this seems like a small incident. But when you think about it, you know, it's relentless. Every day there is something else. So, as I said, we had this instance with the countryside paintings. You know, it's Constable, which is one of the most famous paintings that people love, Constable's Haywain. You know, is that now racist? Is that nationalistic? Why is this being done?
Well, I think you've raised some very interesting points. I think it's been done to specifically goad us and cajole us and get a reaction. Perhaps that's what they want. They're playing games with us.
I think, though, that it is the undermining of our culture by the very institutions that are meant to protect it.
Food for thought. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, as ever. Peter Whittle, the director of the New Culture Forum. Excellent stuff. Now, a quick statement to read out. When The Pale Horse was broadcast in 2020, Sarah Phelps, BBC screenwriter, said this: "Of course, I've taken liberties. Have I changed loads of stuff? Yeah, of course I have. Otherwise, you'd have 30 hours of TV, and would you want to watch it? No. I always go for the beating heart of what Agatha is getting at, and she always throws you little clues, little quantum details. Yeah, and yet you change them." That's a quote from Sarah Phelps. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, and we'll be heading over to RAF Scampton soon as a cap is announced on how many asylum seekers will be housed there. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top story is the government has started to identify, it says, which illegal migrants will be on the first flights to Rwanda. Downing Street said the initial cohort of people are now being contacted, with the Prime Minister still determined, he says, to see the first plane leaving later this spring. And MPs are due to vote this evening on 10 separate changes to the Rwanda bill, suggested by peers from the House of Lords tonight. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has been busy rebuffing speculation about a leadership challenge, saying he isn't interested in Westminster politics. Speaking in Warwickshire today, Rishi Sunak urged his party to stick to the plan and told backbenchers the economy is turning a corner. He was forced to speak out after rumours suggested right-wing Tories may be lining up Penny Mordaunt to replace him. And in the West Midlands today, the Prime Minister announced plans to create 20,000 new apprenticeships. He pledged £60 million worth of new investment to cover a series of reforms, including fully funded training for young people and a reduction in red tape for small businesses. He said the government will pay the full cost of apprenticeships for people aged 21 or under at small firms from the 1st of April. And the former US President Barack Obama even has left Downing Street this afternoon. He was there for private talks with the Prime Minister in what's being described as a courtesy visit. Mr Obama served in the White House from 2009 to 2017. A Whitehall source telling GB News he was there for an informal meeting. He was inside Downing Street for about an hour. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Shall we check on the markets for you then today? The pound buying you $1.2726 and €1.1704. The price of gold is £1,698.34 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day at 7,722 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now it's my favourite time of the show. As ever, I'm joined by the queen of political punditry. It is Michelle Dewberry. Jubes, what's on your menu?
Hello, Martin. Well, of course, I'll be covering all the things that you would expect. We'll be looking at that Rwanda vote live as it happens. I wonder how interested people still are in these votes, by the way, because it is now just borderline ridiculous, isn't it? But anyway, we'll be looking at that as it happens. Also, LTNs. Do we need more consultation on these things before they're just dumped on people in their local community? And I know that people have been talking about this Scottish widow story today. The Lloyds, the owner of Scottish Widows, suggesting that you might want to avoid the word widows because it can be triggering. Well, I want to move on from the stupidity of that, and I want to actually look at what underpins some of this stuff, the so-called ESG objectives of organisations, where they have these huge tick boxes around things like the environment and diversity and all the rest of it. Is this whole agenda a force for good that's much needed, or is it a little bit of a waste of time? So I want to look at that, and shoplifting as well. I don't know if you've seen some of these headquarters at the moment, Martin. Some of these stores, the amount of money and time that they are investing to try and stop shoplifting. I just wonder, though, if it's all a waste of time. Do you think the ship has sailed now? Because people do seem to think, so many people, that they can just wander in, get empty bags and scoop the contents of the shelves into them and people just look on.
Yeah, I think what we need in shops is a Michelle Dewberry in every shop. You'd soon give her a thick ear and they'd be clearing off. That's Michelle Dewberry, 6 till 7, Jubes & Co. An unmissable start to the week. Great stuff. Now, reports suggest that the Home Office has now capped the number of migrants waiting to be housed at RAF Scampton. Of course, that's the home of the historical Dambusters. We'll bring you all the latest soon. Next, I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Jubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Get this right, we all know by now, don't we, that so many NHS workers are abused by people that they're trying to help. We'll all agree that that is pretty damn disgraceful, but what do we do about it? Because now some London hospitals are looking at whether or not they should be able to ban people that do this for a year from those hospital facilities. Is that the way forward? Daniel, do you like this? No abuse, no excuse, that is the campaign?
There's no other choice for most people. It's either the NHS or nothing. And if you're going to take that monopolistic power, then you need, I think, you have responsibilities towards people. You can't cut them off. So there are ways in which, of course, you can bring criminal charges against them. If they've committed a criminal offence, that's fine. They might even be locked up in jail. But what you can't do is cut off health services because you're the only supplier.
Well, yes, I think you can cut it off and you should cut it off.
London is very different from everywhere else, and it goes back to a conversation about immigration. The majority of nurses in London are either African or Filipino, and it harks back to their nature and their culture. When you're younger, your parents look after you. When you're older, you look after them. They don't go into homes. So there's a way that a threshold of tolerance they have that is above and beyond most people. So, because I found like when I was younger, most of the nurses were white. Now they work in hospitals in Ascot and Somerset. London is the war zone. I have seen horrific things happen to nurses, and they stay, they show up for work. There's a protection they are owed, beyond owed. And if you abuse something that's offered to you as a part of your citizenship, there should be a penalty for that. For the same reason,
you're obliged to use it. There's no offer involved in the NHS.
But there is an offer, because at the end of the day, like you earn it, you figure out how to get money and go private. So just because you've created something that gives you no, it's easy. If it's
that's
easy,
an impossible solution.
They've created something that's kind and easy and beneficial to all, indeed. But it's a good thing for all. Do not abuse it. That simple.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:39. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, I've got a few of your emails to go through here. On the topic of Rwanda, you've been getting in touch in your hundreds. Let's have this. This is from Peter. Not a chance of a single flight going to Rwanda. The only way is to take these people straight back to France. They are breaking the law, and if they won't say where they're from, then France is a safe country and they should be taken back to there. Robert says this: for goodness sake, get on with deporting migrants who are not entitled to be in Britain in the first place. Just get on and send them off to Rwanda sharpish. On the same topic here, Linda adds this. Linda says the only growth in this country is lawlessness and mass immigration. The British taxpayers are being robbed to accommodate immigration. The potholes will get bigger and British taxpayers will disappear down them eventually. The young British people have no incentive to work. Jerry adds this. Martin, of course, we had Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, on the show earlier on, setting out Labour's plan to get to the root of solving immigration. And she said this. Jerry adds, Martin, how are Labour going to deport all the illegals living in hotels, and to where? If they have no ID, then how can that even be done in the first place? I think they should be photographed, fingerprinted, and a DNA sample taken in case they try to enter the UK again. Anthony adds this. We keep going on about stopping the criminal gangs, but what about the criminals making millions out of housing these migrants, the lawyers who are milking the taxpayers to represent these illegals? There are many people benefiting from illegal migrants, and that is why there is so much opposition to the crackdown. On the topic of Rishi Sunak, we were talking about record low polling for him, 23 points behind the Labour Party now, and rumours of Penny Mordaunt being put forward as a replacement Prime Minister for Rishi ahead of any general election. Anthony says this. The Tories have nothing now to lose if they dump Rishi Sunak. Truthfully, though, there is nobody capable to replace him from that bunch in Parliament. Joan adds this. Wasted time sacking him. Most of the cabinet would also have to go, plus all number 10 advisors, and that would take simply months to get rid of them all. Thank you very much for your opinions. Let's move on. Now, veteran Conservative MP Sir Edward Lee has published a letter in which a Home Office minister confirms that the number of migrants who will be housed at RAF Scampton is now set to be reduced to 800. The proposed use of the site to house migrants has caused, of course, a huge amount of controversy, with local people in particular expressing concern over the plans. And we've been following this story since the very beginning. RAF Scampton, if you recall, was the site of the historic Dam Busters raids, a cherished part of British military history. It was initially earmarked for 2,000 asylum seekers to be housed there. There, of course, was absolutely no consultation with the locals, many of whom have camped out now for over 1 year in tarpaulin, makeshift tents. They've been keeping a vigil, a brave and often lonely and cold vigil at that site to make sure that publicity is shone upon it. So it's gone down from 2,000 to 800. Of course, many of the locals didn't want any at all, but maybe this is some kind of a victory. Now, in response to the story, a Home Office spokesperson has said the following. We remain committed to housing asylum seekers. That's Wethersfield and Scampton. Wethersfield, of course, is another RAF base, this time in Essex, and will manage occupancy at the sites while prioritising welfare and integration. We are working closely to listen to the local community's views and reduce the impact of these sites, including through providing on-site security and financial support. But the point that the locals would say is that they have been contesting for over a year now and they don't feel listened to, and they kept on protesting. 2,000 down to 800. Is that a victory, or is that simply rubbing it in? Well, coming up, we could be in for a very wet Easter weekend, because it wouldn't be Easter without a wet weekend, would it? But how much of that is down to climate change, and how much of it is simply down to weather? We'll hear from an expert, and that's all coming up in your next hour. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweep in and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild, but it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Earlier on Breakfast.
Good morning to you all. An embattled Prime Minister is urging colleagues to stick with him as leadership rumours fail to disappear.
The Conservative Party is very united. We should not let disagreements turn into speculation.
The public are so rude and so unkind and so demanding, as if they own her, as if they bought her.
I'll be ma when I get home. The boys won't leave the girls alone. They pulled my hair, they stole my comb, but that's all right till I go home. From 6, it's Breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Labour's tax raid on private schools could cost the British taxpayer a whopping £1.6 billion a year. Sir Keir Starmer has promised to introduce VAT on independent school fees if Labour wins the general election, and the party claims the tax would generate £1.7 billion to put towards state schools. But analysis from free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute, claims that the policy could cost more than it makes. Let's get more detail on this report now from journalist and filmmaker Lavina Tandon. Welcome to the show, Lavina. This is often put forward as a way of raising revenue, but it strikes me, Lavina, it never gets thought through, because surely the people who'll be priced out of private schools are the parents and the children who can just about afford to get there to do their best. It won't affect the richest people at all.
Indeed, and Martin, it always, we are delighted in life when we get a told you so moment, and this is one of those. Actually, it has come at the very lovely time for us, an opportune time for us. Over 100,000 people, actually 104,000 people have signed to say that we are anything but posh and trying our best to do the best for our children. And this report only goes on to reiterate that, cast doubts with the IFS report on which Labour stands its policy, and they themselves say it's uncertain. And this Adam Smith Institute report casts further doubts on it. So yes, not only they are not making 1.6, actually they might be losing 1.6, actually, as the report points out, because the number of people who might not be able to send their children to school could go up to 25%, as the report says. I've not completely read into every detail of it, but I'm delighted that what we have been saying has been substantiated by facts, by an institute, an independent institute at that.
Yeah, and Lavina, for full disclosure, I went to a comprehensive, but I've never had any problem with anybody who sent their kids to a private school. If they can afford, if they want the best for their children, then good luck to them. And another thing that would happen here, which I understand, is that if you can't afford any more to send your kids to a private school, then you go for the best state school, and that will force up property prices, and again, they will force out the harder up parents. All of this just creates less and less opportunity for the working classes, those at the bottom. They always get shafted.
Indeed. And what we are trying to say here, Martin, is that if Labour's argument has been that they are trying to do the best for the schools and the state schools, every state school should do well, actually, and that should have come forth through so many years by creative politics and doing other things. But why why punish parents like us who actually, in turn, are the people they say they are wanting to support? So we are anything but posh. They are the kinds of people who are a part of this group are public sector workers. They're working 2 or 3 jobs, some of them staying in shared accommodation, some of them renting a room off their house in order to support their income. And what is going to happen if this policy does come through is that it's going to hurt the very people they are trying to help, in a way that if the argument is that the school is going to absorb the fee, then not many schools will be able to. And what they will do if they really are forced to absorb this fee is to cut down on their bursaries and their scholarships. Thus, who suffers? The parents who actually they say they are helping. So it's a very counterproductive policy. It is pitting schools against each other, and it is telling us in a way that you don't matter. Children of one do not matter. What am I telling my child? Because definitely we won't be able to send. A lot of them I won't be able to send. So what am I telling my son and daughter? That you don't matter in the eyes of politicians, or let's say Sir Keir Starmer or Bridget Phillipson. They haven't spoken to us at all. They are listening to the other side of the story, who we stand for. We stand for state schools as well. But come and listen to us. We have a story to tell as well, and our story is complete.
Okay, Lavina Tandon, we have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. Fascinating stuff, great stuff. Now, a forecaster has warned that the UK is more likely to see snow at Easter than it is at Christmas. And of course, it's the Easter weekend approaching, and we are expecting a washout. Joining me now to tell me more is environmentalist and journalist Nathan Rao. Nathan, why is it blooming well raining so much all the time at the moment, mate?
Oh, I had a feeling you were going to blame me for this, Martin. At the moment, actually, it's not been too bad. It's quite dry in lots of parts of the country. And if you've noticed, it's actually quite mild. But we are going to see a change later this week. And it's all to do with low pressure to the southwest. That's actually what's been bringing in the wet rain that we've seen where you have seen it this week. But also it's been bringing in some very warm, mild southerly winds, which could push the temperatures to about 18 degrees tomorrow and into the middle of the week. But it is all going to change from the end of the week, when a shift in the pressure patterns will bring northerly air in, and that's when we start moving into colder weather again and the potential for more rain. And that's what we're going to be looking at going forward into the following week, as to whether that weather is going to hold out for Easter or whether we're going to get a last-minute reprieve, which doesn't look likely.
Well, I suspect, once again, Nathan Rao, we're going to have another Easter washout. Thank you for being the harbinger of great news. Nathan Rao, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Now, it's so wet in my local park. Somebody's thrown a shark fin in there, a wooden shark fin. It looks like a shark fin is swimming in the park. That's how wet it is. Now, after the break is Michelle Dewdbury, 6 till 7. And, of course, after that, it's Nigel Farage. I'll be back tomorrow, 3 till 6. I've been Martin Daubney. Thanks for joining me. But now it's time for your latest weather forecast with Aidan McGibbon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the GB News forecast from the Met Office. It's a fine end to the day in the east with some bright sunshine, but turning cloudy in the west with outbreaks of rain heading in. Weather fronts out to the west already bringing thicker cloud into Northern Ireland, and those outbreaks of rain will soon sweeping, and they'll push into western Scotland, western fringes of England as well as Wales. The wind picking up gales for exposed parts of western Scotland, and the rain by the end of the night reaching central and southeastern parts of the UK, but tending to fizzle out as it crosses the country. 10 Celsius by dawn, so the cloud, the wind and the rain tending to keep things relatively mild, but it will be a damp start to the day in many spots. However, soon enough, the cloud will lift and break. The rain clears to showers. Showers Could occur just about anywhere, but most likely across the parts of the Midlands into the south of the UK. Some bright spells there for Northern Ireland and Scotland into the afternoon. Temperatures here 12 Celsius, further south mild again, 17 or 18 Celsius in the southeast. Wednesday, though, starts off on a damp note with outbreaks of rain pushing north into central parts of the UK, staying sunny in the far northwest and staying mostly dry in the far southeast. That rain clears to showers once again on Thursday and Friday, and it does turn a bit colder.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time is ticking on your chance to win the Great British Giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Didn't quite believe it and still can't. And if I can win it, anybody can win it.
For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand